Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku chose singing over Heroism Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see Part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗧𝗵𝗃. So let's start the video. Let me tell you a story. Chapter text. Mama, Mama. Rui began to chant as she hopped about on her bed. I pulled up a chair and sat down next to my little girl's bedside. Placing a finger across my lips, I signaled Rui to quiet down. To no avail. Rui's voice slowly raised as she began a new chant. Story, story, story. It was already late. Rui should have gone to bed hours ago. The last thing I needed was Rui waking up the whole neighborhood, let alone her father. I crossed my arms and shot her a warning look. Every mother's secret weapon. Rui's eyes widened a little and she frowned. A rather guilty look crossed her face as she settled down fast. Holding in a smile, I felt relieved that she wasn't going to start up a fit. I held my hands in front of myself. Before I could even begin to say anything to Rui, a firm, yet loving, grip rested on both my shoulders. Hate to break it to you, but if you were about to tell Rui not to wake me up, it's too late. The voice behind me didn't sound irritated or upset. In fact, there was a playfulness to it. I shook my head and rolled my eyes before turning to face Hizashi with a smile. I didn't want to hear my husband was late to work again. He's lucky they've put up with him oversleeping so often. I sat up straight and pointed to the door, blinking innocently. All right, I guess you did just make 𝗧𝗵𝗃 thank you for not firing my husband Cake last week. Hizashi spoke in a playful tone and a small smile on his face. His eyes seemed glossed over with a mixture of exhaustion and warmth. I held my hands up. Go to bed. I'll meet you there. Hizashi leaned in close to me. He gave me a confused, blank stare. The fear that I was too fast for him to keep up again sunk in. I readied myself to say sorry, but Hizashi placed my hands in his and stopped me. Hizashi smiled warmly. I'm joking, heard you loud and clear. I'll see you soon. Hizashi's soft lips pressed against my cheek. Rui covered her mouth and stifled a giggle. Hey now, you're getting one too. Hizashi gently ran his hand in Rui's hair, pushing her bangs out of her face and kissed her forehead. He exited the room, and my eyes followed his movement out the door. The door gently closed behind me, leaving Rui and I alone. I then turned my attention to my bright-eyed daughter who went back to excitedly bouncing about in bed now that Hizashi was gone. Mama, you promised you'd tell me the story. I tapped my lips with my index finger. That story might be a little long for me to tell. Maybe I should have kept Hizashi up for a little longer. Rui is never going to sleep if I tell it to her. My attention turned back to Rui, who hadn't shown any signs of calming down since her father left. Her big, green eyes were practically begging me to tell her the story. I couldn't help but think about how adorable my little ball of energy is. I silently sighed, giving in to my daughter's demands. Okay, you win. I will tell you how I met Daddy. Rui cheered loudly, and I placed my finger in front of my lips again. Rui covered her mouth. Sorry, Mama. I pulled the quilt over Rui and ran my fingers through her hair. Her eyes fluttered as she settled down. I shook my hands and gave my wrists a good stretch. This is going to be a long story. I wanted to be a hero like everyone else, you know. Sorry, I guess not you, but you know what I mean. My family didn't think I had it in me. Of course, they never told me that. After the fact, they said I'm too kind to be a hero, but at the time they held in their opinions, for the most part, and were supportive. My family cheered me on when I got accepted to take the hero course exam at one of the local high schools. They said something about having their doubts but being proud of me for chasing my dreams. It certainly wasn't a UA or 𝗧𝗵𝗃, but that didn't matter to me. I was just glad I was going after my passion, the thing I was sure I was born to do. Until the exam day. That is, I can't really word it any other way. I bombed the exam, scored a big, fat 0. After all the studying and swearing I was going to be a hero, I didn't even take my exam. I actually didn't make it to the front door. I was so worried that I wouldn't pass the exam that I scared myself into failing without even trying. Everything happens for a reason, I guess. I still wanted to help people in some shape or form. After spending all of my high school years sulking over what could have been, I decided to go to college. I got a nursing degree, and after a few years, I found myself at this hospital. After another year and taking some exams, I got moved to this ward. And now I'm talking to you while I try to set up this 4. I stepped back and studied the 4 I had just installed while blabbing on and on about my life story and personal failures. My eyes narrowed as I focused on the drip chamber and began counting. 1, 2, 3, 13, 14, 15. About 25 drops a minute. Perfect. The room was quiet, aside from the sound of writing as I filled out the form on my clipboard. My eyes drifted towards my patient. He seemed out of it, not asleep yet not alert. My pen came in contact with the paper yet again. I made a note of the side effect. Holding the clipboard behind my back, I turned to my new patient and gave the beaten-up man laying in the medical bed a smile. "You're all set, Mr. 𝗵𝗃𝗲. Give me a buzz if you need anything." Acting as if I was working with breakable, fine china, I placed the little button by his hand. Mr. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 was covered in third-degree burns, many of which will leave horrid scars once healed. Undoubtedly, his swollen eyes won't recover for another few days. On top of all that, his arm was broken in 3 different places. Mr. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 asked me while I was giving him his morning injections why I decided to be a nurse. He was in no condition to talk, and I should have lectured him for wasting his energy by trying to talk to me, but I couldn't help myself. If small talk is the only thing I can offer to give him some peace of mind, then what kind of nurse would I be to deny him that much? I pulled out my key card from my pocket and slid the card into a slot attached to the door. Feeling on edge, I patiently waited for the red light to turn green with my hand on the door handle, ready to swing the door open at any time. Before walking away, I tugged on the door. The handle turned, but the door didn't budge. Perfect, he's locked in there tight. As I walked down the pristine white hallway, I glossed over Mr. 𝗵𝗃𝗲's file. The boss had shoved his paperwork in my hands and pointed me to his room before I had an opportunity to read any of it. Looks like he was doing a robbery when he ran into 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗏. That's pretty unlucky. For the entire walk to the nurse's office, my eyes were glued to the file, almost as if I was analyzing every word in the report. The sound of the automatic door sliding open and a gust of cold air brushed up against my skin. I placed his documents on my desk and collapsed into my seat. The clock on the wall read 8. There was a bit of time before going through my patients again. I pulled open a drawer and retrieved my wireless earbuds. Vacantly, I flipped through my phone and looked up a song to listen to. Staring at the white ceiling tiles above, I fought the urge to hum along to the tune. One of my earbuds was quickly removed. I let out a yawn as I now enjoyed my music through my left ear. "Aw, really?" I groaned, realizing most of the vocals were playing through the missing earpiece. "The lyrics are the best part." "Well, sorry," an all too familiar male voice replied. A small chuckle came from his direction. "If you'd like, I can sing it to you." "I think I'll pass." The familiar sound of ceramic being gently placed on wood and the smell of fresh coffee invaded my senses. "Thanks, Takahashi," I said. I smiled at the dark-haired man, who was leaning against my desk. He placed the stolen earbud in his ear. "Hey, do you mind turning down the volume? I swear, you're going to go deaf one day." I shook my head, more likely to destroy my vocal cords than go deaf. My phone screen lit up as I lowered the volume to a Takahashi-approved volume level. "So, why the long face?" Takahashi asked. He sat down on the desk beside mine. "Oh, today is Mr. Suzuki's last day." I leaned forward and dug through the thick stack of files on my desk. "Here we go," I murmur under my breath before handing the papers off to Takahashi. Takahashi began to read the file. His face became more contorted the further down he read. "Ouch, serial manslaughter?" he questioned. "I don't see how you can get along so well with some of these villains." I shrugged. "Some of the villains make for good company. A few of them are some of the most genuine people I've ever met. By the time they get here, they've come to terms with the fact that they've lost. They have nothing to hide. After all, so they skip formalities." Takahashi gave me a strange look. I guess that's one way of looking at it. I met Takahashi's weird look with a smile. "If some of you actually talked to the villains and got to know them instead of merely treating them and kicking them out, I think you all would see where I'm coming from. Whatever works for you, I guess." I rolled my eyes as I picked up the steaming mug Takahashi had placed on my desk earlier. The warm coffee ran down my throat, leaving a trail of bitterness behind. "So how many more do you have?" I held up my clipboard and scanned the paper. "I got 5 today. 2 of my patients need to have 3 checkups. I might also say goodbye to Mr. Suzuki before the cops come and take him away." I placed the clipboard down and slumped into my chair. In the corner of my eye, the clock's second hand moved. "You got the 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗏 guy?" Takahashi asked. My attention switched from the clock to Takahashi, who was looking through my clipboard. There was a small sparkle in his pastel pink eyes. "Who knows why? He seems chill," I replied. "How'd you know about that?" "The burns gave it away," he hummed. "Also, I heard about it on the news this morning." Takahashi placed the clipboard down and slid it back into its place. He pulled the earbud out and set it on the desk. Feeling awkward about talking to the dark-haired man while listening to music, I turned off my phone and placed the earbuds away. "Hey, so do you mind helping me later?" Takahashi asked. He ran his fingers through his short black hair. I shot him a sly smile. "Need something pulled off the shelves?" "Haha, very funny," he replied in a deadpan tone. "You know I'm only an inch shorter than you." He crossed his arms and dramatically looked away. "Besides, keep talking like that and I'll quit opening jars for you. Daisuke Takahashi won't open jars for me. Whatever will I do?" I paused and our eyes met. "I guess I'll just ask someone else to do it." His hand slammed on my desk. A loud thud echoed around the empty office. "That's a bluff. You don't socialize unless it's with a villain." I narrowed my eyes and leaned forward, matching his gaze. "Wanna bet? You filthy villain apologist," he growled. I stayed quiet and we glared at each other for a moment. Takahashi immediately began to snicker. "Sorry, but you're not scary." I slouched into my seat, giving up the act since Takahashi did as well. "Same to you, bud. So what did you want from me?" "Your quirk," he replied. Takahashi returned to sitting on his desk. "What else is new?" I mumbled. "You know what you signed up for when you applied for that quirk registration license." Takahashi reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper and pen. "This patient needs to take a nap next time I see him." In a quieter voice, as if he was whispering a secret, Takahashi continued. "He needs to take his shots. You can give him medication for that." "You know that's not what Lullaby is for," I replied. "But then I won't get to hear your lovely singing voice," Takahashi whined. "You can't anyway," I shot back. "Or did you intend to take a nap with the villain and leave me to give him the shots?" Takahashi smiled in response. Forcing myself up, I told Takahashi I had to leave. He waved goodbye as I turned away from him and walked down the hallway. A mousy voice behind me was frantically calling my last name, catching my attention. I turned around and saw 𝗵𝗃𝗲 walking in my direction. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 stopped in front of me. She took a moment to catch her breath and tucked her brunette hair behind her ears. "Hey, 𝗵𝗃𝗲, good morning. You know you can call me by my first name, right?" 𝗵𝗃𝗲 nodded frantically. "Room 5A. I can't." I placed my hands on 𝗵𝗃𝗲's shoulders. "Calm down. You're okay. Take a deep breath and tell me what you need." I tried to comfort her by keeping a calm expression on my face. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 nodded. "5A is freaking out. I don't know what to do. I did everything the protocol said to do and he just started yelling." 𝗵𝗃𝗲's voice cracked as her panicked tone returned. "What did I do wrong?" You did everything you could," I said. I tried to speak in a reassuring tone. She didn't deserve to worry about something like this. 𝗵𝗃𝗲's panicking was beginning to make my heart race. "You're still new. It's all right. No one is mad." 𝗵𝗃𝗲 handed me her clipboard to me and I quickly looked it over. "All right, I see. Don't you worry, 𝗵𝗃𝗲. I'll go take care of this." I gave 𝗵𝗃𝗲 her clipboard back. Her face was filled with relief. Once again, I reminded her to breathe before I hurried to room 5A. Doctors and nurses were looking on in horror through the safety of the high-security glass room. I must be at 5A. Nothing boiled my blood more than seeing medical personnel looking at the villains like they were animals on display at the zoo. The frown on my face surely showed it. Placing my hands on my hips, I gave them a stern look. "Don't you all have better things to do?" They all turned to me. Acting like I'm in charge left a bad taste in my mouth, but I can't stand seeing medical personnel's gawk at the patients. They dispersed without arguing and I turned to the door. I slid my card into the slot and firmly held onto the door handle. While I waited for the light to turn green, I glanced into the room through the little window on the door to see what exactly I was getting myself into. The villain was spasming. One arm was secured to the rail beside his bed while the other waved about wildly. He let out an inhuman scream as he frothed at the mouth. I entered the room and immediately held my hands up. "Mr. Yashida," I began in a calm voice, trying to hide my fear as I slowly approached the villain. His icy glare stopped me, and I introduced myself. Minutes passed as I waited. Once I felt it was safe to move in closer, I continued. "I understand you're very upset right now. I'm not going to hurt you." He let out another yell, calling me all sorts of profane names. Seeing his aggression up close, I backtracked. "I'm not here to draw blood samples. No needles here or anything. For now, I just need to take your temperature and blood pressure." As I slowly inched closer to the villain, I hummed a soft tune I had stuck in my head. The song played on the train ride to work and it's been on my mind all day. I've been dying to let it out. A huge problem with working at a hospital is the lack of privacy. Today, it was nearly impossible to get a room all to myself to sing out the song and rid myself of the earworm. Singing in public isn't something I enjoy doing. It was no better in front of the villains. I can choose to activate and deactivate Lullaby whenever I want to. Sometimes I get lost in a song and accidentally activate it. Lullaby isn't necessarily harmful, but that doesn't mean I can sing in public and use my quirk, accident or not. It's rude to use your quirk in public like that, after all. The villain began to calm down. The thrashing became less frequent and violent. His breathing slowly returned to normal. I glanced over to the heart rate monitor and watched his pulse slow down. Taking a seat next to the villain, and I secured his arms to the rails next to his bed as I hummed, a few lyrics slipping out of my mouth, pulling my hands away from him and placing them on my lap. The humming gradually slowed to a stop. "Side effect," I mumbled to myself. The villain's cold expression now looked dazed. He didn't appear to know where he was. Lullaby has a few possible side effects. In return for the calming effect, some patients may experience lightheadedness, a bout of confusion or drowsiness. As far as I know, whether or not someone experiences a side effect is random. If there was a trend, I've never noticed it. I sat by the villain's side for a moment and waited for him to calm down completely. Taking a piece of scrap paper, I took his vitals and scribbled it down. The nurses and doctors around here tend to be fearful of the villains, understandably. When one makes an outburst like Mr. Yashida, the staff will sometimes refuse to enter the room for hours. They say it's a safety precaution. I've always thought that mindset was ridiculous. If I can feel comfortable in a room with a villain like this, with or without my quirk, everyone else should too. I took my notes out of Mr. Yashida's room with me and placed it down on a counter. A sudden realization hit me as I looked at the clock mounted on a wall. Oh no, much to my surprise, Mr. Suzuki was still in his room. I slid my keycard in and entered his room. Hello, good morning. The man was quiet and had a grim expression on his face. He was clearly dreading today. Mr. Suzuki was only a few years older than me. According to his paperwork, he was charged with illegal quirk usage. I sat down next to him and thought about what to say. Nothing came to mind. It's never easy to look a villain who knows it's their last day of freedom in the face. I felt a little bad for Mr. Suzuki, though. He was a bit of a flirt during his stay, but even so he was one of my favorite patients to talk to. He was well educated and never asked me personal questions. From what I've learned, he grew up in a well-off family, but got mixed up in the wrong crowd at a young age. He and his group had a botched burglary, and Mr. Suzuki was left to defend his teammates. Laws are laws, though. He's still young, and I was sure he'd bounce back once he got out of jail in a few years. He said keeping his head down while serving his time. Then straightening out his life later was his plan. I'd believe it. Of course, I wished him nothing but the best. The door opened. A police officer was entering the room. I rose to my feet and gave Mr. Suzuki a nod. You be good now. I greeted the officer and the hero who accompanied him as I left the room. Nothing particularly exciting happened for the rest of the day. My patients were on their best behavior as per usual. Fortunately, I'm reasonably popular among most villains. I'm not scared of them and I treat them like people, so they seem to be naturally drawn to me. I finished off the rest of my paperwork and waved goodbye to one of my patients through the large glass wall as I headed out for the day. Wait up. I stopped and turned to see Takahashi rushing towards me. So, do you listen to Put Your Hands Up radio? Takahashi asked as we walked down the road to the train station. I gave him a confused look. Well, you listen to all sorts of music, so I figured you might have heard of it. I'm not too sure. It might have sounded familiar. But I was an avid fan of listening to a wide variety of radio stations, so I could easily have it mixed up with another station. It runs every day between 1 and 5, he explained. I asked him if he meant in the morning. Takahashi nodded. Probably not. I'm asleep by then, I said as I shrugged. I brought it up because they're having a cover contest. You're pretty good at singing when you want to be, so I thought you might be interested. Takahashi smiled at me. He was doing that thing he does again. Takahashi is always trying to get me out of my comfort zone. While I appreciate the thought, it was a bit draining. I hummed as I pretended to give it some thought. Nope. Really? Takahashi asked, dumbfounded. Why? I think you'd have a pretty good chance of winning. I held up a finger. 1, I doubt I'd win. And then a second. 2, it's safe to say the people who are entering want to be musicians. Why would I risk taking that dream from someone? Takahashi frowned. Yeah, I guess you have a point. I just thought you'd be interested. Truth be told, I was interested, but I also stood by my reasons to not enter. You should think about it. All right, I'll think about it. I'm not promising anything, though. I gave Takahashi a small smile, and he returned one as well. He seemed pleased with my answer. We sat together as we waited for our trains. Takahashi's train always stopped by first, leaving me to sit alone for a while. As promised, I thought about the contest. Part of me really wanted to enter just because I love to sing. The other part of me didn't want to bother. Why should I join a contest I knew I was going to lose? It sounds like a waste of time and effort. My train slowed to a stop, and I boarded. People began to flood in behind me. The smell of various perfumes, colognes, and body sprays mixed in the air, creating a nauseating scent. The train rumbled beneath my feet as it prepared itself to move. The city flew by the train's windows, and my mind wandered back to the contest. It does sound like fun, I thought to myself. I recalled my hero exam. The feeling of instant disappointment and self-loathing as soon as I turned away from the school's doors hit me. That day, I made a promise never to let possible failure stop me from doing anything. It was a tough promise, but I tried to follow through as best I can. Sometimes, I needed a push. That's why I appreciated having a friend like Takahashi. I considered both sides, and decided if I can come up with more reasons to enter than not, I'd join the contest. I told myself not to take it so seriously, and reminded myself that I was merely entering for fun. The whole train ride, I counted all the reasons why I should enter and then repeated the process for all the reasons why I shouldn't. None of the excuses I made in my head mattered. Before the train had made it to my stop, I had already made a decision. On the walk home, I wondered what my song should be and I sighed. It might be easy to pick a song if I knew what kind of radio station it was. For a moment, I considered tuning in tonight and listening in for a second before reminding myself that I didn't want to wake up early or stay up late for that. Once again, I reminded myself not to take the contest too seriously. That included doing research on the radio station. In the end, I settled on one of my favorite songs. I didn't care if the song fits the radio station's target audience or not. If I was going to embarrass myself in front of who knows how many people, I at least wanted to have fun with it. The sun was beginning to set as I unlocked my front door. Using the sunlight peering through my open windows, I made my way towards the hallway. My fingers ran along the wall until I bumped into a light switch. The floor beneath my feet creaked with each step to the bedroom. I dressed into something comfortable while deciding what I should eat. I didn't make anything too fancy, a simple box of macaroni and a soda. I sat myself down on the floor in front of the television. Placing the bowl down on the coffee table before me, I opened the bottle. The hiss of air pressure escaping the lid and the overly sweet scent of fake sugar made my stomach rumble. I watched TV while I ate. There was a news report about a villain attack at UA. That's awful, I frowned. Who would go and try to hurt those poor kids? I hoped none of the students and staff were harmed. However, as horrible as it might sound, I was also hoping none of the villains were hurt as well. Well, I muttered to myself as I poked the macaroni with my fork. If I get swamped at work these next few weeks, I know what happened. I sighed as I dreaded the sudden influx of work. I can feel the overtime already. Feeling tired, I turned off the TV and headed towards my room. Throwing myself onto the bed, I pulled out my laptop. I should go record that song entry before bed, I said with a slight giggle. I hated to admit it, but even after swearing up and down that I didn't want to enter, I was still excited. It's not like I wanted to win anyway. Chapter texto. Takahashi hummed in a way that was practically dripping with an I told you so tone. Because I don't think I'd win, decided to enter the contest after all. Takahashi shot me a sly grin. He took the little flash drive in my hand and held it up. Can I listen to it? My face reddened at the thought. No. Some other staff looked up and began to stare in my direction with angry eyes, hearing my sudden outburst, and I slumped into my seat. No way, I whispered. Why not? He asked, leaning closer to me. You know the entries are going to be played on air, right? I covered my face with my clipboard. Please don't make me regret handing you that flash drive. Just enter it for me. If I try to do it myself, I will most definitely change my mind. Takahashi opened his mouth to speak. The phone on my desk rang, cutting him off. He closed his mouth as I held up a finger to Takahashi. Hello, this is the villain ward. How may I help you? Hello, my name is Eiko Suzukaze from the 𝗎𝗏. She didn't need to say any more. I already knew where this conversation was going. We had a nurse call out sick, and your name was listed as a potential backup. We have a couple of heroes in critical condition, and we were wondering if you'd be available to pick up an extra shift. I internally sighed as I debated whether or not to say yes. The villain ward was surprisingly quiet considering the villain attack on UA. I was concerned that I'd be swamped, but that wasn't the case. In the end, I decided one shift couldn't hurt. Yeah, okay, when do you need me? Isn't an hour all right with you? Eiko asked. According to my clipboard, I was almost done for the day. Yeah, I can do that. Great, Eiko said. We'll see you soon. Okay. The optimistic tone in my voice slipped. I took another look at my clipboard as soon as I hung up and groaned. When I transferred to the villain ward, I didn't expect to make ends meet. The senior doctors suggested I put my name on a list to pick up extra shifts since the 𝗎𝗏 always needed help. Not knowing any better, I went through with it. As it turned out, the villain ward is always steady. A lot of doctors and nurses don't stay longer than a month. How was I supposed to know the villain ward was so busy all the time? After my shift, I slowly made my way to the 𝗎𝗏. Although both the 𝗎𝗏 and the villain ward were part of the same hospital, the villain ward was separated from everything else. It was understandable, yet inconvenient. I walked up to the front desk and introduced myself to the man sitting behind the counter. It's been about almost a year since I've been in the 𝗎𝗏. Not since I got my quirk usage form approved and moved to the villain ward. I was handed a folder sitting by the man behind the desk, who was waiting for my arrival. He then pointed me towards my temporary patient's room with a pleasant smile on his face. Being in the 𝗎𝗏 again felt strange. It was almost exactly like the villain ward, but still very different. The 𝗎𝗏 had the same pristine white floors and walls, and it even seemed like the layout was the same. The staff also seemed stressed out, but I knew they were stressed for other reasons. Everyone in the 𝗎𝗏 appeared to be overworked. They typically stayed long hours, and sometimes they went weeks without a day off. I'm thankful the villain ward isn't like that. I treat my 3 or 4 patients a day, then go home, nothing more, nothing less. However, the villain ward does have its downsides. As much as I try to relax and be friendly, I'm well aware the villain ward was beyond dangerous. I come in contact with several villains a day. We have layers and layers of safety precautions to keep the staff safe, but the possibility that something could go wrong was always real. 𝗎𝗪 didn't need those precautions. I noticed as soon as I made it outside the small room. I reached into my pocket and instinctively pulled out my keycard. I paused, my eyes glued to the door handle. It was an ordinary door with no key slot. It took my brain a moment to register that the 𝗎𝗪 had no reason to lock their patients in their rooms. Feeling silly yet also relieved that no one was around, I slipped my card back into my pocket and walked inside. Hello there, mister. My voice trailed off as I realized I had forgotten his name. I glanced at the file in my hands. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, I choked out finally. I looked up at my temporary patient and observed his bandaged up state. Well, I guess you're probably not in the mood to talk. I pulled up a chair and studied the tube sticking out from under his bandages. Tilting my head, I wondered if he was even awake. Mr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, I'm sorry, but is there a signal you can give me to show you're awake? I looked down and saw one of his unbandaged fingers twitch. Okay, that's good. I knew I had to check 𝗧𝗵𝗲's eyes, however. They were bandaged up. Okay, I'm just going to move your bandages just a hair. I held my breath as I began to worry I was most likely talking a bit too much for 𝗧𝗵𝗲. It was another habit from the villain ward. Villains don't often trust anyone, even medical professionals, so I learned things often go smoother if I explain everything I do first. It kept me safe while making the villains feel secure. I fidgeted with his bandages until I saw an intense black eye looking back at me. All things considered, he seemed alert and responsive. I smiled at him. I'll let you get used to the light before blinding you with another light. His eye blinked and looked around the little room. While he was preoccupied, I stared at his file and read it in full. A villain attack. I remembered Deku said he was a hero. An alias was listed on the paper in my hand. Eraserhead. It didn't sound familiar. His file mentioned villains attacked him, and I wondered if he's affiliated with UA somehow. The time frame between the attack and his visit appeared to match up just right. I looked up from the folder and saw him staring at me. A chill ran down my spine. I guessed he wouldn't be able to answer my question. Not in this state. A knock on the door interrupted the checkup. I nearly jumped out of my seat. Usually, a knock on the door, or any sound, was a bad thing at the villain ward. Holding my clipboard close to my chest, I glanced over to the door. A man wearing orange glasses was standing outside. He gave me a friendly wave and an awkward grin. My eyes moved from the little window to the door. I locked it, yet another habit from working at the villain ward. I unlocked the door and it slowly swung open. Immediately, I bowed my head to the stranger. I'm so sorry. I'm used to locking the door behind me, and I suppose I did it without thinking. No worries, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲, the man responded. Realizing he didn't sound like a doctor, I looked up at him. Out of everything about him, the first thing that caught my eye was how tall and slender he was. Soon after, I was hit with everything else that stuck out about the man, which was basically everything. His outfit looked interesting, to say the least. He was wearing a black leather jacket and matching leather pants. It looked like some sort of speaker-like contraption was strapped around his neck. Just looking at it made my neck hurt, but it didn't seem to bother him. I guessed he must be a hero. It seemed fitting that a hero would have hero friends. Oh, you must be visiting Mr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I'll leave you to be. I exited the room and closed the door behind me. The blonde man's voice rung out clear as day through the closed door. I walked away to grab myself a snack from one of the machines lined up in the lobby. When I returned to 𝗧𝗵𝗲's room, the blonde hero was sitting by his side, still deeply engrossed in a one-person conversation with the bandaged-up man. Sorry if I'm interrupting, I said as I walked up to the pair. I need to change out his four-back. The blonde-haired man gave me a wide smile. Can I stay and watch? I giggled at his enthusiasm. It was refreshing to hear after a long day. I don't see why not. If you watch closely enough, I'll let you replace the next one. I was joking, clearly, but I could see a small glint in his emerald eyes. My heart jumped to my throat. The bandaged-up hero let out a low sound in protest. And suddenly I was grounded again. I pressed my lips together in a tight line, trying to suppress a smile. After this, I'll let you finish your... My voice trailed off as I glanced at the nearly helpless 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Conversation. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 let out another groan from under his bandages. I bit my lip and stifled a small chuckle. My name is Present Mike, the voice hero, he said, hands full. I gave him a nod and introduced myself. I've never met a hero before. At most, I saw them in passing whenever they took my villain patients away. Today must have been my lucky day. I was in a room with two of them. I wasn't one to glorify heroes as celebrities, but I'd be lying if I didn't admit I was a little starstruck. So, Mr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the doctor's bumped up your painkiller's dosage in this bag. If you start to feel uncomfortable in any way, let anyone know, and we'll make adjustments, I explained as I replaced 𝗧𝗵𝗲's four-back. The blonde hero's gaze was behind me. Taking a step to the side, I tried to give him a good view of what I was doing. Spending all day in the 𝗎𝗪 sounds like a real downer. Yo, the blonde hero said. I could hear a faint squeak as he swiveled the little rolling chair as he spoke. I wouldn't know, I replied, before glancing over my shoulder towards his direction. I'm just filling in. I actually work in the villain ward. His face contorted into a mix of shock and concern behind his glasses, and I snickered as I turned my attention back to the 4 bag in my hands. That reaction wasn't uncommon. When people think villain ward, many think of big, burly men capable of single-handedly holding down a villain. Not a girl like me. All done, I announced. Don't have too much fun, you two. I gave them both a small smile before leaving them alone. I could tell the 2 men were good friends. Aizawa's visitor stayed by his side for hours. I've heard from the staff that he's called in every few hours since Aizawa was first administered to the 𝗧𝗪. Honestly, it made me feel a little jealous. I had friends, but I don't think any of them were that dedicated. Sure, I'd expect Takahashi to visit me if I ever landed in the 𝗧𝗪, but I don't think he'd frantically check up on me to that extent. His visitor stayed past the end of my shift. On my way out, I popped my head into Aizawa's room and said goodbye to the men and wished them both a good evening. A few weeks passed, and I hadn't been called to work in the 𝗧𝗪 since that day. I overheard from staff members that Aizawa stubbornly demanded he be released early after a visit from another hero known for her healing quirk. He apparently stressed that he needed to go back to work. From what they said, his personality was a bit intense, and he intimidated the staff to give in to his demands. I couldn't help but find the whole situation humorous. My thoughts were cut off by my alarm blaring from my laptop. It took me a moment to remember what that alarm was for: the contest. I placed my laptop on my lap and clicked around. Here we are. Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome to Put Your Hands Up Radio. The MC yelled. We've got a lot of talent from all across the country. Too many, in fact. I painstakingly listened to all of them and picked my personal favorites to go head-to-head. I placed my hand on my cheek. Have I listened to this radio station before? He sounds familiar. His voice was so distinct. And it was driving me crazy, not knowing where I've heard him talk before. My eyes widened and my heart nearly stopped. He was the blonde hero I met at the 𝗧𝗪. My face heated up. Beyond the embarrassment, I was also impressed he managed to hold down 2 full-time jobs. It wasn't uncommon to see a hero pick up a brand deal. However, most heroes do a small commercial and call it quits. I couldn't help but admire his dedication to both being a hero and his radio show. I hadn't realized several song entries had already played by the time I remembered why I was listening in the first place. And this next song is from a real sweet chickadee. My face was practically on fire at this point. Something told me my song was next. I was right. While I knew I should feel excited that I made it this far, something about meeting the judge made me feel uneasy and doubtful. I began to worry that I didn't deserve my spot. And he was trying to be nice because he recognized my name. Anxious and insecure, I waited for my audio track to stop playing. After hearing my voice fade off to silence, he named off the title of another song. It was time for round 2's rules. The hero handpicked a song for each remaining contestant. I wrote the name of the song he picked for me. I stared at the title. It didn't sound familiar at all. Unsure, I immediately tuned out of the radio station to listen to the song. My chest tightened as I listened to the song the hero picked out for me. It was a genre I seldom listened to, and was well out of my comfort zone. I had a week to submit my second entry, and I fully intended to use every day I had to practice and fine-tune my audio track. After several days, I recorded my final version of the song. I tried to listen to my recording, but I stopped halfway through. It was painfully evident that I was uncomfortable with the genre. Unlike the first round, I allowed Takahashi to listen to my cover before submitting it, assuming a second opinion would make me feel better about the whole thing. Takahashi promised it sounded fine, but I was left unconvinced. I knew how unnatural I sounded. The song was too low for my vocal range, and I foolishly tried to match it. He was my friend, and I was sure that he was merely trying to be supportive. Reluctantly, I gave Takahashi a copy of my second entry, so he could once again enter the contest for me. I kept my mind off the contest for the next few days. The anticipation was starting to wear off, and things were beginning to feel like normal again. For the first few days, I felt self-conscious about using my quirk on my patients, but over time, I had gotten over the anxiety that came with entering the contest. I was happy that things seemed to be back to normal. The night of the next round was fast approaching. Just like last time, I set an alarm to remind myself to tune in and listen. This time around, I showed up early. Hey party people. Mike here, bringing you all some fantastic covers. I pulled my blanket to my face as the hero's voice rang out from my laptop speakers. I reminded myself not to get too excited and that I entered the contest for fun, not to be Japan's next idol or anything ridiculous like that. The hero explained this round. Each entry had a code that listeners could text to place votes. I didn't like the sound of that. It was one thing to think that the hero was going to pick the winners, but having complete, faceless strangers choose my fate made me feel antsy. Once again, I reminded myself that I entered for fun. That reminder became more like a mantra as I listened to each song play. Every song sounded better than the last. It was increasingly apparent that most, if not all, of the entries were serious auditions from musicians and vocalists wanting their next big break. Part of me felt bad that I entered for fun. My stomach turned when my entry played. It sounded terrible. I could hear how uncomfortable I was. I felt embarrassed that both my name and voice were attached to this audition. I wanted to go die in a hole somewhere. If singing weren't a crucial part of Lullaby, I would have quit singing right then and now. Covering my face with my hands, I waited for the recording to stop. I expected this to be a challenge, but 𝗧𝗵𝗃 nailed it. My expectations were completely blown away. I lifted my head from my hands and glanced at the laptop screen. I couldn't believe what I just heard. He liked it. How? It was garbage. I tried to comprehend his words, but I couldn't understand how someone who listens to music regularly could find my entry acceptable, even though I couldn't find anything good to say about my entry. The hero's words did make me feel a little bit better. I couldn't tell if he was genuine or not, but it made me feel more secure hearing someone, who wasn't Takahashi, praise my voice. Trying to take my mind off this mess, I listened to every entry. My entry might have been a flop, but I still loved listening to music at the end of the day. I could look past my complete failure and enjoy hearing the other contestants. As I did so, I wondered when the winners were going to be announced. As if the hero could hear my thoughts, the music slowed to a stop. And that right there are tonight's songs. The blonde hero's voice rang out. I'll give all you listeners out there a 5-minute break to vote for your favorites. I considered voting for myself so that I knew I had one. But I stopped myself. I scolded myself for even considering that as an option. Don't be pathetic like that. This was the longest 5 minutes I've ever felt in my life. I tapped the space bar on my laptop as I waited. Not hard enough to press the button, but enough to hear the hollow sound. I glanced at the time. 3 minutes have passed. I continued tapping anxiously. 4 minutes have passed. I began grinding my teeth as I finally hit the 5-minute mark. And we're back, ladies and gents. I have the results right here in front of me. I closed my eyes and lightly chewed on my lip. The hero playfully muttered something about needing his drumroll sound effect. He began to list off names. As each name rang out through my laptop, I could feel my hope physically slip through my fingers. He cleared his throat. And those are our winners of the round. My heart sank. I didn't make it. I haven't felt this disappointed since I had to go home from my hero exams to tell my family I didn't even take the test. I reached out to hold down my laptop's power button when I paused. The hero was asking someone behind the scenes if he could push someone to the next round. It was faint, but I swear I heard my name uttered. I was nearly positive of that. Okay, well, the next round is the singer's choice. He sounded like he was audibly upset about something. It drastically contrasted with his hyper and cheerful front. I turned off my laptop and pulled the covers over my head. I knew I should have felt disappointed. I knew me well enough to know this loss should have left me sad and embarrassed. Much to my surprise, I wasn't all that upset. The hero's tiny compliment echoed in my mind. He even asked if they could bend a rule to push me to the next round. Although I lost, I felt flattered by all the praise the hero had given me. Present Mike, I thought to myself. He's a real sweetheart. I'm glad I got to meet him. This is definitely not a date chapter text you live and learn, right? At least you got to say you tried. And hey, you made it pretty far, right? I smiled at Takahashi. He was talking with a very cautious tone. What is that I hear? I paused and a confused expression formed on his face. Playfully, I gasped. Is that the sound of Takahashi feeling a bit guilty? The look on his face mixed with the tone of voice he was using gave it away. It's okay, I began. I'm fine, really. Takahashi didn't look convinced. But how? Remember that rejection therapy we tried a while ago? You nearly cried when someone said you couldn't borrow $1. Memories came flooding back. I sank into my chair just thinking about the experience. I expected you to be an embarrassed mess right now. Your singing played over the radio. Do you know how many people probably heard it? What's different about this time? I knew exactly what was different this time. My mind jumped back and forth between deciding whether or not I should tell Takahashi. Well, I'm not sure. I didn't want to mention the fact that the hero might have tried to push me to the semi-final. After all, I wasn't exactly sure he actually said my name. I listened to the radio almost all day, and I've never heard of that radio station until you mentioned it. How popular could it actually be? The nurse's office went silent. Takahashi kept his eyes on me as if he was analyzing me. I guess denial is a coping mechanism too. He mumbled. Takahashi's hand rested on my shoulder. Just don't bum yourself out about it, okay? We'll go out to dinner to celebrate. It'll be my treat. Yet another reason why Takahashi is such an angel sometimes. He always made it clear when he was concerned about me, and admittedly, that was more often than it should be. I'm buying the most expensive thing on the menu, I said. I chewed on my lip, suppressing a smile. He shrugged with a small smile. Go buy the entire menu if it'll make you happy. So do you think you'd try again next year? I hear Present Mike holds a different theme every year. Nope. I shook my head. Too stressful. Takahashi gave me a warm smile. Some things never change. Days have passed since the contest. By now, it was almost a distant memory. Takahashi followed through and we went out to dinner to celebrate my failure. After that, neither of us brought it up ever again. I was sitting down next to a new patient, humming a little tune to the beat of the heart rate monitor beeping in the background. My fingers ran along the back of his hand, feeling the scales as I moved. The man with the fish mutation was completely zoned out, giving me all the free time in the world to try to spot his veins under his blue, scale-like skin. My eyes narrowed, and I stopped humming. As carefully as I could, I stuck the syringe in my hand between a group of scales and into the villain's skin. The little capsule filled with blood. As it did so, I prayed that the villain wouldn't succumb to. I covered the tiny puncture before placing his blood samples on a small, metallic tray. Time to go to the lab. This is from C4, I announced. The tray made my hands feel cold. I was glad to finally place it down on the desk. A woman with long chocolate-colored hair tied up in a ponytail gave me a nod before returning to her microscope. I backed out of the room. The lab portion of the ward made the hair on the back of my neck raise. All the shiny equipment looked interesting and scientific, but it also made it seem as though like the villains were test subjects. I knew it was ridiculous to think about such things, especially considering that I knew why I drew the villain's blood. It was for a simple allergy test. After delivering the blood samples, I looked towards the clock. It's just a little past noon. I had a little bit of time before needing to administer vitamins around to my patients and updating their vitals. The office was mysteriously empty. It was a rarity to find myself alone. Typically 1 or 2 other nurses are sitting around as well. I sat down at my desk alone, and I began to scribble myself a to-do list on a scrap piece of paper. Who is he? Takahashi asked. He slammed his hands on my desk, causing me to jump. I have no idea what you're talking about. My eyes met his pastel pink eyes for a moment before returning to my notes. Hizashi Yamada, he answered. He spoke in such matter-of-fact tone as if a name would clear everything up in an instant. That name didn't ring any bells. However, I did receive 2 new patients recently and considered that I might have forgotten their names. Yamada, I hummed as I looked over the clipboard twice over. No one with that last name was listed. Nope, not a clue. Takahashi placed a scrap paper with a name and phone number on the desk. He called while you were out. Sounded pretty cute. How does anyone sound cute? I questioned. I felt the chair press against my back as I leaned to look up at him. Don't change the subject. Takahashi slid the paper closer to me. My eyes followed his hand. I raised an eyebrow and looked at Takahashi in the face. And this Yamada guy asked for me. You sure? That didn't sound right. I don't recognize the name at all. Takahashi nodded with a smile on his face. He's probably someone from the asking me to cover a shift again. Takahashi's face lit up. Introduce me if he works here. You got it, I replied. My eyes were glued to the phone number. Something still felt off about the whole thing. You know, shouldn't there be an extension or something? Takahashi rested his chin on the top of my head. Maybe. I could tell he was trying to think of any and all excuses for the missing extension I brought up. It's a personal number. And why would a guy I've never heard of before give me his cell? I smiled to myself. I have you trapped in a corner now. Call and find out. Takahashi egged me on, urging me to talk to the mysterious stranger. I groaned. Fine, I'll do it. For science. Atta girl. I have to make my rounds. Let me know what happens when I get back. I nodded. Takahashi walked out of the tiny office and turned a corner. The sound of my nails tapping the wooden desk filled the, now once again, empty office. The whole situation seemed off. My senses were telling me throw away the number, but my curiosity was screaming at me to call and find out. I felt the cold plastic phone against my cheek as the dial tone sounded in my ear. My fingers hovered over the numbers, hesitating for a moment before dialing the numbers. My fingers fumbled with the twisted cord as the disc tone rang. My call was picked up almost immediately. Hello, hi. I didn't plan my next move after dialing the number. I held my breath and paused. Is this Hizashi Yamada? The voice didn't reply back for a moment. Oh, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲. I was hoping you'd call back. That nickname gave everything away. My face flushed red, realizing it was a hero on the other end of the line. Hey, so listen up. I was really digging your tunes, and I was wondering if you'd meet up with me for a music deal. It took me a while to register what he was asking. I'm sorry. He repeated his words precisely as if he had practiced his half of the conversation before. I couldn't understand why he'd want me. I lost. I'm sure you're busy, but how does tomorrow sound? 𝗬𝗎 house in Tokyo. We can talk about it in detail then. I preferred to talk it over now on the phone. Trying not to sound too reluctant, I agreed. He gave me an address and time. I'll see you then. Right. I hung up the phone and tucked away the slip of paper into my pocket. As strange as it sounded, I felt nervous about talking to the hero face to face. He was a talk show host, so things didn't line up. What kind of music deal could he possibly have in mind? So did you call? Takahashi sat down on my desk. I placed my forehead on his leg. What should I say? I explained everything I knew to Takahashi as I hoped he'd come up with a few reasons why the hero would want to talk to me. A stern look was plastered on Takahashi's face. Maybe this is a date, and he's too nervous to call it one. No, he doesn't seem like the type to get anxious about things like that. That didn't add up right. He had to have at least a few fans. It didn't make sense as to why he'd ask me, of all people, out on a date. Takahashi hummed. Is your license up to date? Using your quirk here is illegal once that expires after all. I reached into my desk and placed the little plastic card on top. Still has a year. I keep track of important things like that. Besides, if that were the case, Mike would probably come here instead of asking me to meet with him tomorrow. Takahashi crossed his arms. Let me think. His thinking was short-lived. I dunno, maybe he's a fan of your singing, and you're gonna leave us to be a famous singer. No, I doubt that. I held in a laugh. Out of everything Takahashi said, that one was the least likely. I was more ready to accept that this was actually a date over something ridiculous like that. I'll just wait and see tomorrow. The meeting with the pro hero was at an awkward time. There was just barely enough wiggle room to get off work, change into something else, and make my way to the train station. Takahashi used up a few precious minutes to complain about my makeup, put more effort into it, as he put it. I had to remind him that this wasn't a date. Tokyo was both how I imagined it to be and not what I thought at the same time. I expected it to be a large, busy city. However, it was far more crowded than I thought. The streets reminded me of the train station, narrow to the point that I was nearly walking shoulder to shoulder with strangers. I held my purse close to me, fearing that any one of these strangers could take something without me noticing. The sun was beginning to set and the lights were slowly flickering on for the night. Before the night sky appeared, the sky was already lit up by the neon lights. Walking in the crowd felt like being in a stream. There was no time to stop and read signs. Every time I tried, I felt a body ram into me accompanied by a voice telling me to watch where I'm going. The time the hero gave me to meet up with him was fast approaching, and the tea house seemed to be nowhere in sight. Just as I was about to give up and call the hero, I spotted it across the street. The door to the tea house swung open. A little bell chimed as I walked in. My eyes scanned the area. There weren't many patrons in the tea house. Most of them were elderly. The smell of freshly baked treats mixed with brewed tea filled the little room. I didn't know much about the hero. However, I did notice how overexcitable he was. I was pleasantly surprised he picked a place with such a calm atmosphere. As I took my first steps inside, I was greeted by a hostess. She was a young girl with short black hair and big brown eyes. The girl bowed her head, welcoming me to the tea house, before lifting her head and giving me a bright smile. I gave her a small smile that paled in comparison and a head nod. My mind was racing a million miles an hour. How do I begin to describe who I was meeting here? Should I call him Present Mike or Hizashi Yamada? The hero wasn't on the top 20 list of heroes, as far as I knew, and I wasn't sure if she'd recognize his hero name. On top of all that, I wasn't positive he would even be in his hero costume, as I began to consider that today might be his day off. I'm meeting with someone here. I scanned the room behind the hostess, looking for the hero. Before I had a chance to begin describing him, a voice called out, "Oh, there you are." I looked over, as well as all the other patrons. The blonde hero was waving me over by a door on the other side of the room. The hostess was now looking at me. "Sorry," I muttered. I tried to not make eye contact with any of the patrons as I passed by them. A few low voices whispered among themselves. I did my best to ignore it. I stood before the blonde hero and looked up at him. The hero was seated in another section of the tea house, accessible through a back door. This room wasn't as packed as the front, but everyone seemed to be seated much closer together. He led me to a table in the back corner and sat down. He motioned his hand to take a seat. I slid myself into the chair in front of him. He had already ordered. A set of teacups were placed down on the table, and a matching teapot stood in the center. An array of cookies and pastries were scattered about. My eyes were fixed to the hero in front of me. I didn't know what to say, so I sat quietly, waiting for him to start talking. It didn't take long at all. I soon realized once he started talking, he didn't seem to stop. Heroes are also entertainers of sorts, and he was also a talk show host. It made sense that he didn't seem to struggle with holding a conversation. Back at the I recalled witnessing him carry an entire discussion on his own while his injured friend did his best to tune out the blonde hero. I sat quietly. Steam escaped from the teapot as I poured myself a cup. The teacup warmed my hands, and I breathed in what was unmistakably green tea while the hero chattered on in the background. The earthy taste of the tea mixed well with the sweetness of the cookies placed closest to me. I kept my gaze forward, watching him talk about various topics that didn't seem to link. In the corner of my eye, people occasionally turned around and looked in our direction. They were whispering to one another. Is it his hero status or the volume he's talking at? He leaned forward, resting his head on his hand. The hero had finally taken a moment to pause. I stole this opportunity to push the conversation towards why he asked me to meet with him. That's right, about that music deal I called you about. I placed down my cup. It made a hollow sound as it touched the table. I rested my arms on the table and leaned forward. I was wondering if you wanted to stop by my radio station from time to time and sing on air. The hero had a sweet smile on his face, but I tried to understand where he was coming from. However, it didn't make sense to me. I lost. Why not ask whoever won? I guess you can say I'm a fan. The smile from his face faded a bit and he furrowed his brows. Besides, your loss might have been my fault. I should have picked a better song for you. I just wanted to hear you give that one a go. Is that why he wanted to push me into the next round? Because he felt guilty over his song choice. I'm sorry, Mr. Mike. The hero cut me off quickly. He invited me to call him by his first name. Hizashi, I corrected myself. The smile on his face returned. It was even bigger compared to earlier. I really like my job, and I wouldn't quit for anything. The hero's face fell flat, and he let out a sigh. An unexpected hint of guilt hit me. He stayed quiet and tapped on the table for a bit. That's a wickedly dangerous job you got there. Honestly, I was shocked when you mentioned it. His tone was much more serious and his volume lowered. I smiled at the hero. Oh, my quirk makes the job so much safer. No need to worry. I'm the last person you'd need to stress over. His head perked up and he raised a brow. Oh yeah, what's your quirk? I pointed to my mouth. It's called Lullaby. My singing can calm people down. He stared at me. The expression on his face remained. I paused and tried to think of what else to say. Sometimes it can make people sleepy too. Ah, a vocal quirk. Hizashi sounded excited over learning a little bit about my quirk. It's almost like we have the same quirk. Hizashi introduced himself as the voice hero. It was obvious that he would have a vocal type quirk. Even so, his playful tone of voice was strange. Something doesn't sound right. Really, I feared that he would notice the doubtful tone in my voice. But I was trying my best to humor the hero. Yeah, my quirk can put people to sleep too. His voice perked up, causing my doubts to grow even further. Meeting someone with the same type of quirk was not unheard of. It seemed a bit too coincidental. Perhaps it was his playful nature. Hizashi began to go into detail about his quirk. I can amplify the sound of my voice significantly. It knocks villains out right away. I gave Hizashi a blank stare. Hizashi asked me if something was wrong. I shook my head. His eyebrows were furrowed, and he had a slight frown. Hizashi's posture changed from confident and upright to hunched forward and anxious. A smile crossed my lips, and I began to laugh. The people sitting next to us looked over with angry eyes. I covered my mouth in a futile attempt to not disrupt them even further. Hizashi's posture relaxed, and his eyes appeared to be sparkling under his glasses. A pink tint dusted his face. Well, it's too bad that you aren't interested in my offer, which is still on the table, by the way. He tapped the unusual device around his neck. I kinda wanted a co-host, he whispered. I politely declined the offer. Just thinking about hearing myself on the radio again made my heart stop. I informed him that it was better to leave that kind of stuff to the professionals. I thanked him and bowed my head. Hizashi sighed. Yeah, well, I looked up at him. He was biting his lower lip and looking down. Hizashi's face lit up almost instantly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Do you mind if we stay in contact? You know, in case you change your mind. I cocked my head to the side and looked at him. I debated whether or not that was a good idea. Hizashi seemed harmless. He was sweet and funny, even charming in his own eccentric ways. Besides, if Hizashi called my desk again, Takahashi would give him my number anyway. Possibly even throw his own in too as an extra bonus. I pulled my phone out of my purse. Hizashi read out his number in a hushed tone. I sent him a short one-letter text, giving him my phone number. The hero's eyes lit up. He seemed genuinely happy. My face heated up, and I felt my chest squeeze. Great, now you're stuck with me until you get a new phone number. I smiled at him. Is that a joke or a warning? The time on my phone read 8. By now, the sun was down completely. Well, it was nice talking to you, but I have to get going. I pushed my chair back. Hizashi stood up instantly and offered to walk me out. I didn't see the harm, so I agreed with a bright smile on my face. On the way out, a few patrons took quick, last-minute glimpses in our direction. I crossed my arms and stared down to the ground as we walked by. Are they looking at Hizashi or me? A hand lightly touched my shoulder and I broke my staring contest with the ground. Hizashi gave me a reassuring smile before removing his hand. We stepped out of the little tea house. I bowed my head and thanked him for inviting me. Hizashi suggested that we do it again sometime. His fingers played with his jacket zipper. I nodded and agreed. He looked at me with wide eyes. Was that not the answer he was expecting? On the walk back to the train station, I could feel Hizashi watching me walk away. It didn't feel creepy or unsettling. In fact, it made me feel safe. It was almost like I had my own hero just for myself. Let's go on a date, maybe? Chapter text. The office was quiet. Everyone inside was sitting at their desks and doing their own thing. In the corner of my eye, Takahashi was hard at work, filling out a form in front of him. I, on the other hand, had my phone out and was using the calculator to crunch some numbers. My phone vibrated on my wooden desk. Everyone behind me was looking in my direction with angry eyes. Taking the phone in my hand, I bowed my head to all the other nurses and apologized. Takahashi snickered under his breath as he continued working on the form. I took a look at the text that disrupted everyone in the office. I'm bored. It didn't surprise me the notorious message was both from Hizashi and nothing important. Shouldn't you be in class? I sent the text and kept the phone in my hand so the vibration wouldn't bother any of the nurses. As I waited for Hizashi's inevitable reply back, I skimmed through my pictures and found one Hizashi had sent me. It was a selfie of Hizashi in his hero costume with a large group of students behind him. Most of the students were smiling in the picture. One student with ash blonde hair had quite the scowl on his face. Another, a much taller boy with glasses, had a look of disapproval on his. Hizashi sent me the picture shortly after he told me he was a teacher at UA. I thought it was one of his jokes. He sent me the selfie as proof. It was insane that Hizashi had 3 jobs. Sometimes, I struggled to find free time with the one I have. Hizashi couldn't be any more impressive. Then I learned he taught English, on top of having 3 jobs. Being a huge music buff and a public figure, Hizashi was also bilingual. English wasn't my strong suit. I had to take it in school, but I definitely needed to brush up on it. My phone buzzed again. This time, I was prepared for Hizashi's text. Nope, lunch break. Can't get rid of me that easily. The little devil emoji he used caught my eye, and I found myself unintentionally smiling at his text. Hizashi didn't use emojis very often, but when he did, they often seemed thought out. Shouldn't you be eating then? I shot back. 2 things made me worry about Hizashi. It was hard to tell if he was eating and if he was getting enough sleep. I've asked him about it a few times, and he's always half-heartedly promised he was doing fine. As both a friend and a medical professional, it's hard to not worry about his health. I flinched as something soft hit the side of my head. A subtle tap from the ground caught my attention. A wadded-up piece of paper sat at my feet. I scanned the office. Everyone was still diligently working at their desks. As quietly as I could, I picked up the paper and carefully opened it. It was a note, in a big, bold font. The paper read, "Stop texting your boyfriend and get to work." Upon reading it, I knew exactly who it came from. I glared at Takahashi. The mischievous smile on his face grew. The corners of his mouth curled up. I crumpled it back up into a tight ball and threw it at his head in return. Takahashi deflected the paper with his hand and swatted it back in my direction. The ball bounced off my forehead and landed back on the ground. "Knock it off, you two." I held my breath as the senior nurse's voice out from the back of the room. Takahashi and I simultaneously apologized. We exchanged smiles and mutual eye rolls in agreement as we both looked down at our paperwork. We had a truce, for now. Takahashi reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell. My phone vibrated. Part of me wanted to ignore the text, assuming it was from Takahashi. However, I didn't want to pass up the chance to yell at him for getting us both in trouble. The text was actually from Hizashi. It was another picture. I opened it and read the caption. "Who said I wasn't eating?" The image was a simple store-bought bento box sitting on a white table. In the upper corner, I could see a still bandaged-up Aizawa looking a little perturbed. Before I had a chance to reply, a second text came in. "And you?" "Well, nothing right now. I still have loads of paperwork to get through." I could only imagine the sass Hizashi was going to give me once he reads my text. My phone buzzed immediately. Here it comes. Question: what is the male version of a maid of honor? This text was from Takahashi. I gave him a confused look from my desk and shrugged. He beamed as he tapped his phone. Takahashi didn't look away or pretend to work. Instead, he kept staring at me, with an expectant look in his eyes and his brows raised. Another vibration went off. "Because when you and that hero get married, I call dibs on that." I fought back the urge to throw my phone at Takahashi, knowing that he'd catch it. Having enhanced reflexes must be nice. One by one, the nurses in the office began to get up from their desks and leave. I finished my paperwork a while ago, but I stayed at my desk. Hizashi and I continued to text. Once the messages from Hizashi slowed to a stop, I began waiting for Takahashi to finish. Too busy goofing off and teasing me today, I see. I smiled to myself. He was reaping his karma for the day. The office was nearly empty. The atmosphere in the air was much more relaxed. "So, have you asked him out on a date yet?" Takahashi asked. "No, wait, why me?" I asked. "If I were interested, I know I'd appreciate it if you'd ask me. I'm sure the same goes for him. I mean, how long have you two been texting each other?" Takahashi turned to me, resting his head in his hand. 3 weeks. My heart stopped for a second as a smile crossed Takahashi's lips. "It's not like I'm counting the days or anything like that." The few remaining nurses looked up, glaring in my direction. Sorry, I whispered. Come on, girl. I'm not telling you to propose, though I can see that happening. Takahashi smiled, and I playfully punched his arm. It's just a date. You don't need to know every little detail about him before that. Learning about someone is the whole point of dating. I hated that Takahashi and I were having this conversation, and I especially hated that he was right at the end of the day. Well, my voice trailed off. As usual, Takahashi had a point. I'll send the text if you want, Takahashi said. He held out his hand. Whenever I had to make difficult decisions, I often relied on Takahashi to help. Sending texts I didn't have the guts to send myself certainly qualified. With shaking hands, I held my phone out. Suddenly, I hesitated. No, I'll do it. Takahashi got up from his seat and sat on my desk. He only ever did that for one thing. He was planning on having another one of his heart-to-heart conversations with me. You can't keep self-sabotaging yourself like this. You could have been a hero at one point, but you walked out before you took the exam. Takahashi's pink eyes looked into mine. He was practically radiating brotherly energy. Repeat after me. Taking risks isn't that bad. I averted my gaze elsewhere and reluctantly repeated his words. Great. Now go send that text. I stared at my phone and typed the first thing that came to mind. I reread my message and deleted it. No, that sounds too casual. Wanna go get coffee? Takahashi said. I looked up at him with a confused expression. That's all you need to ask. It doesn't have to be a flowery proclamation of love. I don't think he should be drinking coffee, I muttered. Takahashi frowned at me. Fine, swap coffee for tea. But that's what we did last time, I answered back. You're doing it again. Takahashi crossed his arms. His brows were knitted together in frustration. Ask if he wants to go for a walk. A midnight stroll is romantic. But Takahashi cut me off, once again, reminding me that I was making excuses. A small whiny groan escaped my mouth as I stared at the phone in my hands. I was staring at my phone for no more than a minute, but it felt like hours. Defeated, I rewrote my original text and sent it. Do you want to do something this weekend? Hey, Takahashi began, and I didn't need to press the send button for you. I'm so proud. He pretended to wipe an invisible tear from his eye. My face flushed. I rose from my seat. I'm gonna go check some vitals or something. As I walked away, Takahashi snickered. I quickly walked down several winding plain white hallways to the cafeteria. Not a soul was in the kitchen. The sound of my footsteps echoed as I approached a large, silver fridge. I took quick glances over both my shoulders before opening the refrigerator and swiping a pudding cup. Hiding the treat in my pocket, I backtracked to one of my patient's rooms. The villain's eyes lit up as soon as I dangled the pudding cup in his face. Now, let's see that arm, I said. He snatched the dessert from my hand. The chair legs scraped on the floor tiles as I dragged a chair beside his bed. The villain obediently sat still for me. Looks like I don't have to sing for this one today. I was pleased he was being cooperative. It was much easier to be kind to the villains and save my quirk for the more challenging patients. Sometimes being friendly with them meant breaking a small rule here and there. In this case, bartering a stolen pudding cup for an easier time drawing blood. I secured an elastic band to the villain's arm and searched for his vein. He and I engaged in some small talk. Many of the villains asked me personal questions and, for the most part, I was an open book. As foolish as it was, I had no problems getting into my own life with the villains. They were all going to be sent away to prison, so what did it matter if they knew my hobbies, what shows I like, what my favorite color is, or where I go on my days off? The only problematic possibility is if a villain got released. Even then, the chances were slim. It would most likely be years from now, if it ever did happen. Who knows where I'll be in the future? I might not be working in the villain ward anymore or even live in the same city. My phone vibrated while I was placing all the villain's blood samples on the metallic tray. I stayed seated and pulled out my phone to take a peek. My eyes traveled up from my phone to the villain beside me. You don't see anything. The villain, who was currently preoccupied with his pudding cup, nodded. Yeah, sure, whatever. I took a deep breath before opening my message from Hizashi. Actually, I'm busy this weekend. My heart sank. I was an idiot for asking in the first place. Hizashi was a very busy man. There was no way he'd ever go out of his way to make time for me. Utterly defeated by the rejection, I continued reading the rest of his text. I'll be commentating at the UA Sports Festival. You're more than welcome to swing by. I'll send you a special guest pass. We can meet up for a bit at the festival. Taking the pass was a little intrusive in my eyes. Hizashi would surely be busy at the festival. The last thing I wanted was to force him to spend time with me because I, albeit unintentionally, guilted him into inviting me. For now, I left the message unread. I still had work to do. After work, I'd ask Takahashi for his opinions. He got me into this mess. He can get me out. Takahashi held my phone in his hand as we walked to the train station together. I say go for it. The sports festival is a big event. It's hard to get tickets as is. So even if your hero boy is too busy, at least you got to say you saw the sports festival live. I had been staring at the ground for the entire walk. Don't you think I'll just be bugging Hizashi though? What if he starts thinking I'm only friends with him for the perks? Takahashi stopped walking. I did the same. He held my phone up to my face. Too late anyway. My eyes widened. I read the screen and my breathing stopped in its tracks. Takahashi replied for me. It felt like my heart was nearly going to stop as I reread the message he sent Hizashi. Sorry for the late reply. I was busy at work. I'd love to go. It's okay if you can't find the time. We can do something next weekend. I looked up from my phone to Takahashi, who had his trademark toothy, mischievous grin on his face. Way to make me sound desperate, I said. I was seconds away from bursting into tears from the embarrassment alone. Not desperate, Takahashi began, determined. It's a good quality to show off. Takahashi placed his hand on the small of my back and nudged me to start walking again. Don't give me that look. Playing love doctor is hard when you're hopeless. I'm not hopeless, I whispered. Takahashi's words stung a little. That's the spirit. Just go to the festival and have fun. I know you don't want to hear it, but this is another chance to see where life takes you. I reluctantly nodded as I reread the text Takahashi sent Hizashi yet again. The day of the sports festival came quickly. I ran my fingers down my dress, trying to straighten it out a little more. The person staring back at me in the mirror looked unconfident and nervous. Her face looked pale and flushed. She looked like she had a bit too much makeup on and she wasn't comfortable in the summer dress she was wearing. I look fine. I tried to convince myself that I didn't need to change again for the third time. My hands trembled as I held the pass Hizashi had mailed to the hospital. He had been spending all week helping the school prepare for the festival. He barely had any time to do anything else. I looked back up at the mirror, giving myself one last look before heading out. The festival was packed with people walking nearly shoulder to shoulder. Several rows of vendors selling food and various souvenirs were tightly lined up next to each other. The air was filled with the smell of fried snacks and the sound of chatter amongst the crowd. I cautiously walked along the stream of festival goers, trying to keep myself from getting pushed around. A message from Hizashi popped up on my phone early this morning. I'll be commentating for the first years. I knew where I wanted to go, but I had no idea where it was. After wandering around and stopping a pair of heroes on patrol, I eventually found the arena for the first years. All the seats up front were getting filled quickly. I looked down at my pass and found where I was supposed to be sitting. A large hero was sitting to my right. Another hero was on my left. And the row in front of me was filled with heroes. I was out of place. The civilians were on the other side of the arena. Did I make a mistake? I reread my pass. There was still a bit of time before the festival began. I dialed Hizashi's number. My phone rang while my eyes remained glued to the pass in my hand. What's going on, chickadee? Are you hyped or what? I stuttered a small hello. Hizashi and I were more or less texting buddies. This is the first time I've talked directly to him since the tea house. I had a question about the pass you sent me. I think I'm supposed to be on the other side, with all the other civilians. Hizashi chuckled on the other end of the line. No, you're in the right spot. I figured the show will be way more lively on the hero side. I stumbled over my words while trying to explain why I didn't feel comfortable being where I didn't belong. After struggling to put my thoughts into words, I sighed. Okay, thank you. Hizashi explained that there would be a lunch break halfway through the festival. He invited me to stop by the commentator's booth. Sure thing. I hung up the phone and looked out towards the arena. The hero to my right and I made eye contact while I put away my phone. He gave me a kind smile and turned his attention back to the arena. Hizashi's voice boomed from the speakers mounted around the arena. The energy in the stands rose tenfold. A second voice then caught my attention. I didn't expect Hizashi to be joined by 𝗬𝗏. The day I spent watching 𝗬𝗏 in the he, understandably, didn't say a word. His voice sounded just like how I expected, a little on the deep side with a hint of apathy to it. The kids began walking out into the arena in groups. I immediately recognized the first group. Class 1A, I mumbled. That was the class Hizashi took the selfie with. I quickly spotted the boy with the sandy blonde hair with the scowl. He didn't look any happier at the festival than he did in the picture. The boy with the glasses who had the disappointed look in the photo then caught my eye. So that's the class that survived the villain attack. A hero behind me asked. Yep, do any of them stick out to you? Another replied. I listened to the two heroes behind me dissect every student in Class 1 while the other students filed out into the arena. It was a little distracting. I thought the other classes had potential too, so it was disheartening to hear them only talk about one, trying to see their side. I suppose 1A is the class that bravely fought off a group of villains. 𝗬𝗏 and Hizashi sounded good together. 𝗬𝗏's calm attitude contrasted Hizashi's outgoingly playful tone. At the hospital, it was apparent that they were close friends. However, it was nice actually hearing the two talk with my own two ears. To a much lesser extreme, Hizashi and 𝗬𝗏's banter reminded me of Takahashi, and Takahashi was nowhere near as outgoing and vocal as Hizashi. while I wasn't anywhere as serious as 𝗬𝗏. Thinking about it that way, their friendship made sense. Opposites attract after all. The first challenge for the kids was an obstacle course. I anxiously watched the kids fight through a wave of giant robots, traverse a dangerous pit, and cross a minefield. I was well aware the kids were more than capable, but even so, it was nerve-wracking watching them. Every so often, I'd catch bits of Hizashi's voice. As the race went on, I found myself less anxious, thanks to the playful commentary blasting out of the speakers. The second challenge was a cavalry battle. The remaining kids had 10 minutes to group up. I took this time to stretch my legs and buy a quick snack. On the way back to my seat, I ended up accidentally missing the first few minutes. The most fascinating part of the cavalry battle was watching the various strategies. It brought me back to my childhood. When I had plans to be a hero, I studied all sorts of tactics the great heroes of our time used. I still had a knack for the topic. Many of my conversations with my villain patients eventually involved critiquing how they got caught and what they could have done better. Admittedly, telling villains how they could be better villains isn't the most intelligent conversation topic, but it was still interesting to me. It became apparent that a lot of teams relied on the strength of their quirks. Some relied on their teammates with support quirks. The group in the number 1 spot was more focused on evading and defending. The cavalry battle came to an explosive end. The team in the number 1 spot got knocked down, and a new team took their place. A team that was steadily clinging onto the 4th place spot was overthrown by a group that maintained 0 points for most of the challenge. Hizashi's voice caught my attention as he called the 1-hour lunch break. I got up from my seat and followed Hizashi's instructions. I waited by the door that led up to the commentator's booth. Hey, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗃, having a good time?" Hizashi asked. He walked out and leaned on the door. I nodded with a smile. "Yes, I am, thank you." Hizashi circled around me and placed a hand on my back. "Great to hear, come on, let's go." Before I had a chance to ask Hizashi where we were going, he began nudging me up a set of stairs. The narrow stairwell was dark and a bit claustrophobic. Hizashi's hand, still placed between my shoulder blades, helped me feel less nervous. However, it made my heart rattle in my chest. Hizashi opened the door at the top of the stairwell. "I brought a guest," he announced. The bandaged-up 𝗬𝗏 turned around and looked at me. Now that he was alert, I understand why people thought he was intimidating. Even so, he didn't hold a candle to some of the villains I've treated, probably because 𝗬𝗏 is a hero. Even the most frightening man seemed like a puppy when their job is saving lives. The blonde hero placed his hands firmly on my shoulder and led me to the seat next to 𝗬𝗏. "You can sit here while I go grab some grub." I sat down and watched Hizashi walk away. He turned to 𝗬𝗏 before exiting the room. "You be nice, mummy man." And with that, Hizashi left 𝗬𝗏 and I in the room alone. "So, how are your injuries healing?" I asked. "Fine," he muttered. "Oh, that's good to hear." I wanted to ask 𝗬𝗏 some medical questions, an impromptu checkup, but he didn't seem like he was in the mood. If memory serves correct, Yue also has a very talented nurse with a healing quirk. I didn't want to overstep my boundaries. The two of us sat in awkward silence. It appears neither of us knew what to say. I had no idea why Hizashi left me with his friend. I was under the impression he and I were going to do something during the lunch break. 𝗬𝗏, on the other hand, while he was friendly enough, seemed exhausted. I turned the chair towards the massive window and watched the people in the stands slowly disperse. 𝗬𝗏 turned towards the window as well. That cemented my thought that he didn't have any interest in talking to me. His friends are certainly interesting. Chapter text. I sat quietly in the commentator's booth. In the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of the bandaged-up man beside me. His eyes were closed. "Is he sleeping?" I leaned forward to get a better look. His eyes were definitely closed, and I could see him move faintly as he breathed. The hair on the back of my neck raised instantly as 𝗬𝗏 slowly opened his eyes and looked over to me. I recoiled back and turned my head. "Oh, sorry." 𝗬𝗏 never responded to my apology. Instead, his chair rotated a bit. I kept my eyes on the stands below. The blanket of people slowly dispersed, and after a few minutes, very few were left staying in their seats. Once again, 𝗬𝗏 caught my attention. This time around, his eyes were open. It seemed like he was watching the crowd with me. I didn't say a word to him, and 𝗬𝗏 did the same. The door's hinges squeaked, breaking the silence between the hero and I. A feminine voice called out from behind us. Her voice filled the room. "Oh, hey, I'm surprised to see both of you still here." I held my breath, and my body stiffened as if I had just been caught doing something I wasn't supposed to. 𝗬𝗏 swiveled his chair around to face the source of the voice. My heart was pounding in my ears as I followed the hero's lead and peeked over from behind the chair's back. My eyes met with a pair of gorgeous blue eyes almost immediately. It was almost like the stranger had been looking in my direction long before I had turned around. A woman with long dark hair and fair skin was standing at the door frame. I recognized her immediately. Her hero name is Midnight, the announcer for the first-year students. My face felt hot, and I broke eye contact. "Oh, hello, are you Eraser's friend?" The heroine's voice drew my gaze back to her. I hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say before slowly shaking my head. "She's with Mike." Aizawa's voice sounded muffled, likely from the bandages. The sound of heels hitting the floor echoed in the booth as the heroine walked up to Aizawa and as she stood before me and bent forward, closely looking me in the face. A sweet scent emanated from the heroine. My gaze darted from her eyes to the door behind her. Something soft pushed up from under my chin, forcing me to lift my head. The burning sensation on my cheeks grew as I looked back at her. She began to mumble to herself. "Those eyes and that hair." Her eyes narrowed kindly, and she smiled. "Oh, I know who you are." My eyes darted from the heroine's face to Aizawa. "You do," I squeaked. She let out a seductive yet playful giggle. "Yamada won't shut up about you. Whenever he's in the break room, he always ends up referencing something you've said or a conversation you two had and the like. It would be adorable if it weren't so annoying." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. Should I apologize for Hizashi? "I can see why you've got him seeing through rose-colored glasses. You're terribly cute." She had a smirk on her face. A chill ran down my spine as she licked her lips. "It's not fair. Quit being weird, Midnight. You're scaring her." The tone on Aizawa's voice seemed like he was mildly irritated, almost as if a switch had been flipped. The heroine's seductive look in her eye completely vanished, leaving a playful smile. "I think you're more likely to scare her away. You're so serious all the time." She stood up straight and walked around the little booth. I kept a close eye on her. "So, where is Yamada anyway? I wouldn't think he'd leave this cutie with you." "Food." The wheels on Aizawa's chair rolled along the floor. He was, once again, facing the window. I held out my hand towards the blue-eyed heroine, biting my lip as my hand trembled. She held my hand in hers, and the shaking stopped instantly. With the biggest smile I could muster, I introduced myself. "You can call me 𝗵𝗃. I nodded in response. Looking into her eyes, I just now realized how much her expression had changed. She had a gentle look on her face that radiated. 𝗵𝗃 was both beautiful and kind. A surge of intimidation sunk in. "No, none of that." I gave her a smile that seemed to pale in comparison to hers, in my mind. "Thank you, it's nice to meet you, 𝗵𝗃. She's so cute," 𝗵𝗃 cooed. Her soft hand slipped from mine, and she took a step back, giving me my space back. The sound of her heel touching the floor echoed. "Let's see what I remember. Your quirk outs people to sleep, right?" "Yes, but not exactly." The look on her face told me she needed more information. "My quirk just calms people down. Some people get dizzy, some sleepy, and others don't get a side effect." 𝗵𝗃 crossed her arms and cocked her head to the side. "Is that so? How interesting. I've never heard anyone say that about my quirk before." I wasn't sure if I should ask why or thank her. She turned to Aizawa, who was still looking out the window. "Isn't that a good quirk for Mike? She'd be able to ground him and bring him down a notch or two." Aizawa didn't respond to her question, let alone move. "What does that mean?" "I think she has the wrong idea." She turned and looked at me. Goosebumps ran along my arms. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "He's just so loud, and sometimes he can talk quite a bit. Do you know how often someone has to tell him to quit yelling?" That, I understood. Memories of spending time with him at the tea house came back to me. He certainly knew how to draw attention to himself. Your quirks are like complete opposites in a way. It's cute. Cute. Suddenly, I remembered Hizashi's little joke, and I let out a soft chuckle. The expression on 𝗵𝗃's face lit up, and she seemed like she was interested in knowing what I was thinking about. Before she could say anything, I let her in on what was on my mind. "Actually, if you ask him, he might say he and I have similar quirks." "That's some backward logic," she said. I agreed with her. The room went quiet again. Playing with a lock of hair in my fingers, I avoided looking directly at either of the two heroes. "You're not much of a talker, are you?" I looked at 𝗵𝗃. "Not at all." I partially lied. 𝗵𝗃 mentioned how cute it was that Hizashi and I were so different. I smiled at her and nodded. There was that word again, cute. It made me wonder what exactly Hizashi has been saying about me. Once again, the room fell silent. I didn't have anything to say, and it appears they didn't either. Specifically 𝗵𝗃. Taking a quick look at the ever-so-quiet Aizawa, I realized he had begun taking another nap. The sound of footsteps echoed off the walls. Both 𝗵𝗃 and I looked over to the closed door. I held my breath in nervous anticipation. Hey, sorry I took so long. I tried being super stealthy, but it didn't exactly work out." "How rude of you keeping us ladies waiting," 𝗵𝗃 called out. My hands folded on my lap, and my gaze shifted to the wall. "Mummy Man should have kept you company, right?" Hizashi said. The smile faded from his face for a moment as soon as he looked towards his bandaged-up friend. It soon returned, and he chuckled. "Ah, maybe not. He was sleeping when I showed up," 𝗵𝗃 said. She crossed her arms and gave Hizashi a stern yet playful glare. "You're hopeless, you know that." Hizashi placed the bags in his hands onto the table. "Yeah, I know." He turned to me. "Sorry, chickadee. I expected Eraser to stay awake." No, it's all right," I spat. In the background, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 asked what a chickadee is. Hizashi pointed in my direction. Listener number 1, I'm gonna apologize anyway, so get used to it. His attention shifted to 𝗵𝗲𝗄. Listener number 2, a chickadee is a type of songbird. Songbird, because of her quirk, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 asked. Hizashi shook his head as he turned his back to us. By the sounds of it, he began digging into the plastic bags he had carried in. Hizashi turned around with several small containers in his hands and some drinks. The glass bottles clinked together as he readjusted everything he was holding. Nah, that was a coincidence. I wish I could take credit. It's super fitting, though. The blonde hero walked up to me. He held one of the boxes and a drink in front of me. Once I took it, he gave one to 𝗵𝗲𝗄. I held the little box in one hand, in my other, the drink, which was my favorite soda. The box was a bento, with a colorful bird decor decorating the lid. Inside, it had a collection of my favorite fruits and snacks with a side of rice. In the background, Hizashi was asking 𝗵𝗲𝗄 about the festival and how much time they had left to eat. As they talked, I kept my head down and my eyes on the things in my hands. What's up, chickadee? My head snapped up, and I turned to Hizashi and 𝗵𝗲𝗄. Hizashi's brows were knitted together, and the smile on his face wasn't nearly as wide as it usually is. Did I mix up the boxes? Is the drink all right? Did I make a mistake somewhere? No, that's not it. Really, I was just surprised you remembered what kind of things I liked. I honestly can't really remember when I told you. It's impressive. Hizashi's smile returned to normal instantly as if he was pleased with my answer. Behind him, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 was opening the lid of her box. Don't let that hopelessness fool you. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 giggled as she picked up one of the strawberries in her box. Hizashi spun around and gave her a glare, causing 𝗵𝗲𝗄 to start laughing. When it comes to people, he's really good at remembering small details like that. You can tell him something once, and it's stuck in that head of his. Hizashi had previously stiffened as 𝗵𝗲𝗄 began to talk. As she finished, his posture returned to being more relaxed. He stepped out of the commentator's booth and returned with a pair of seats. Hizashi placed them by Aizawa, and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 asked if she should wake him up. However, Hizashi shook his head and told her to let him sleep. He added a small joke about how he didn't want Aizawa to be grumpy. He was the one stuck in a small booth with him. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 shrugged it off and took a seat. I offered to trade with Hizashi, but he declined. The three of us ate while Aizawa napped. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 and Hizashi talked about the festival and went in depth about each individual student. I silently listened. As I watched the festival, I had come up with predictions of my own, and I was interested to see how they fared against the two heroes' opinion. They knew the students much more than I did. After all, what do you think, chickadee? Hizashi and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 looked towards me. I poked at the food sitting on my lap. I'm not really sure. A few of the kids stuck out to me. But my voice trailed off. The thought that I might say something stupid was eating me up inside. Hizashi leaned forward. It seemed like he was intently listening to my words. I bit my lip and wondered what I should say. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 made a comment about how shy I am, and Hizashi shook his head and informed her that I talked a lot more than she thinks. My face heated up as I listened to them discuss whether or not I'm social. I took a deep breath. You can do this. I mentioned some of the strategies I took notice of earlier in the previous games. Using descriptions of their appearance and quirks, I added which kids I thought were going to win. Shadow quirk, Hizashi asked. I nodded, my eyes averted to the silver floor, waiting for the hero's professional opinions on my thoughts. Takoyami is a great pick. Sounds likely. I looked up. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 was nodding along to Hizashi's words. Your thoughts were intriguing. I didn't expect you to know so much about strategy. I glanced at 𝗵𝗲𝗄. I froze for a second. Do you really want to tell them about what happened back then? I picked stuff up at work. Villains, you know. I see. Question, isn't your job dangerous? 𝗵𝗲𝗄 asked. It can be. We have a lot of rules and precautions to keep everything running smoothly. The words practically slipped out of my mouth. I've had to have explained that at least 100 times since I began working at the villain ward. Do you have any stories? You should talk about that. Wouldn't that make a cool public lecture for the hero course students? I bet they'd be hyped to hear about what you do. Hizashi's eyes lit up. I suppose, I replied. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 chimed in, adding that it was my choice. I nodded and told the two heroes that I'd try to think it over. My job isn't as exciting as you'd think it is. It's kinda like a normal hospital, except all the patients are, well, villains. The conversation returned to the sports festival. I sat silently, eating the side of rice supplied in the box while the two heroes debated. It was delicious, considering it was plain, white rice, and the fruit seemed fresher than what I'd find at the grocery store. Hizashi's voice began to rise as he playfully debunked 𝗵𝗲𝗄's points. Will you shut up? I flinched. Aizawa didn't raise his voice, but he has never spoken so loud around me. I glanced at Hizashi, unsure if we were in trouble or if Aizawa was mad at us. Hizashi was still slouched into his seat in a relaxed position. He had a wide grin on his face. Sorry. Hizashi's voice was reasonably quieter. I brought you something to eat. Don't need it. 𝗬𝗏 seemed to be more relaxed himself, though he didn't look like it. However, it was hard to see him under his bandages. "You should, though," I said. 𝗬𝗏 turned to me, and I held my breath. His eyes under the bandages looked intense. "You're still healing. You need all the nutrients you can get." 𝗬𝗏 stared at me, unblinking. For once, I forced myself to maintain eye contact with him, showing him that I was not going to back down from my statement. 𝗬𝗏 sighed. He slowly wheeled the chair around and faced the group. "Thank you," I said. 𝗬𝗏 remained quiet as he glanced at me for a split second. I can see why Mike has been making sure to bring himself a lunch lately. Hizashi's face reddened as he shot 𝗵𝗃 a look. Both 𝗵𝗃 and I laughed at his reaction, causing his already flushed face to grow even redder. 𝗬𝗏 let out a muffled groan. 𝗵𝗃 looked my way. I turned around to see what she was looking at. The stands below were beginning to fill, and a crowd was manifesting from the ground. "Looks like the hour is up." Heels on cement caught my attention. I turned around. 𝗵𝗃 was standing in front of me. "I have to go back down there. Would you like to come with me?" Hizashi stood up from his seat. I nodded. 𝗵𝗃 slipped a hand on my back, in between my shoulder blades, her nails lightly touching my skin. She nudged me forward, and I followed her lead. 𝗵𝗃 stopped. "You don't need to come with. Isn't it out of your way?" Hizashi paused. "Oh, right. That's right." He let out a chuckle. Hizashi looked at me. "I'll see you later, 𝗧𝗵𝗃." I waved and said goodbye to both of the men. The stairwell down to the stands was dark. 𝗵𝗃's voice echoed as she warned me to watch my step. For a moment, we both stayed quiet as we walked. The sound of our footsteps and Hizashi's fading voice were the only things accompanying us. We eventually walked far enough away, and Hizashi could no longer be heard. "You make him so nervous without even trying." The tone in 𝗵𝗃's voice was playful and lighthearted. "I do?" I asked. 𝗵𝗃 glanced down at me and smiled as she nodded. I had no idea. The warmth in my fingertips drained, and I suddenly felt cold. "Like I said earlier, he talks a lot about you. Seeing you two together, it's interesting." Her choice of words caught my attention. "Would you consider going out on a date with him?" 𝗵𝗃's question made my heart jump. It was like I had a lump stuck in my throat. Was she asking me out for him? Or was she just asking out of curiosity? It killed me that I didn't know 𝗵𝗃 well enough to be able to tell. I hummed. The sound of my voice echoed. "Well," I paused. Although I already knew the answer to her question, saying it out loud made me feel like my heart was going to stop. "I would." "Yes, why?" 𝗵𝗃 asked. She kept looking forward. She didn't return my gaze, not for a second. That made things worse than if this was a face-to-face conversation. My breathing was beginning to quiver, taking a moment to refrain from answering. I counted to 10 in my head as I wondered if there was something specific she wanted to hear. By the time I had reached 10, I had calmed my breaths. "Why?" I repeated. I went silent again. The sound of our footsteps bounced off the walls. The darkened hallway was beginning to brighten up. That was a clear signal that we were approaching the last few steps. "He's funny, intelligent, and sweet. I enjoy our conversations too." My fingers trembled as I spoke. I balled up my hands into fists to steady them. 𝗵𝗃 hummed as we walked. She didn't ask any more questions. The dark-haired hero reached forward and touched the door. Sunlight filled the hallway as the door swung open. 𝗵𝗃 and I stood in front of each other for a moment. "Yeah, he can be sweet when he tries. Those boxes he brought us, he asked Lunch Rush to make them specifically for us." 𝗵𝗃 smiled at me and placed a finger across her lips. "Listen, he'd kill me if he finds out I'm telling you all this. So keep it a secret, okay?" I nodded. "Yamada wears his heart on his sleeve, so 𝗬𝗏 and I worry about him sometimes. When we learned about you, 𝗵𝗃 cleared her throat. I was a little worried." 𝗬𝗏 was indifferent. 𝗵𝗃 raised her hands and put indifferent in air quotes. "I like you, though." 𝗬𝗏 didn't yell at you, so that's a good sign. She cocked her head to the side and placed her hands on her hips. Her eyes traveled up and down. "I think you'll do fine." "What does that mean?" Before I could ask, 𝗵𝗃 turned around. She waved. The handcuff dangling from her wrist shined in the sunlight. "See you around, songbird." I retraced my steps back to my seat. After my talk with 𝗵𝗃, I had a lot to think about on my mind. "Hey, how is everybody doing?" The roaring of the crowds drowned out my thoughts. "Give it up for our finalists." A steady stream of blue UA outfits walked out and towards the center. 𝗵𝗃 greeted the kids and revealed the next game. A tournament. She invited the students to draw lots. I kept my head down as they got matched up. My mind was still busy, buzzing with all sorts of questions. It was hard to concentrate. The stadium's high energy and the pro heroes talking amongst themselves made thinking hard. "And here is the matchups." 𝗵𝗃's voice brought me back to the festival. I scanned the board. As the tournament went on, Hizashi and 𝗬𝗏's commentary blared through the speakers. 𝗬𝗏's comments were few and far between. However, they were analytical and insightful. Hizashi's comments were entertaining and engaging. I observed the matches closely. Some of them seemed unfair, while others were close. Oddly, watching the kids made me feel nostalgic. although I gave up my chance. They all had their weaknesses, but it was clear they were trying their best. All these kids are going to be great heroes. 𝗵𝗲𝗄's words echoed in my mind during a match between two 𝗵𝗲 students, a girl with a gravity quirk and a boy with an explosive quirk. Hizashi's comments were utterly biased. He was audibly upset when his favorite lost. He wears his heart on his sleeve. That was certainly true. The tournament ended much sooner than I would have liked. Everyone, including me, watched in awe as All Might handed out the medals. The crowd's applause roared into the sky as the festival came to a close. I got up from my seat, escorted by the hero who sat beside me. I made my way outside in the middle of a flock of heroes. My phone's ringing was just barely audible over the heroes talking. I took a peek at my phone. So, how is the festival? It was Takahashi. Between the festival and meeting Hizashi's friends, I had so much I wanted to say to him. My fingers hovered over my phone as I tried to think of the best way to summarize everything. Hey, thanks for convincing me to go. This time it's for real. Chapter text. I should have been born with wings because I'm basically Cupid. I rolled my eyes. Takahashi crossed his arms and pouted. Come on, it's true. Who made you call your hero boy back? My face contorted into a physical cringe at the phrase hero boy. You, he grinned. And who made you go to the sports festival? You. I placed my head in my hand and lightly tapped my desk, much to my dismay. He didn't seem to catch the flat tone in my voice. He nodded. Yep, I told you so. You two are so going to get married. And it will be all because of me. I say I deserve to give the wedding speech. I earned it. Takahashi sounded very proud of himself. I slumped into my chair. Nobody said anything about actually going out on a date. His friend asked if I was interested. That's all. Takahashi's eyes lit up. He gave me a toothy grin. 3 words, ask him out. Why is it always me? I asked. Takahashi reached out for my phone. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest as I dove for it. The phone just slipped from my grasp and landed into Takahashi's hands. Damn enhanced reflexes. I can do it. Takahashi swiped his finger along the screen. My home screen reflected in his eyes. I'm not gonna pull any punches, though. I buried my face in my hands and listened to Takahashi tap my screen while commenting on the pictures in my gallery. Just thinking about what he could possibly say to Hizashi was making my face flush. I don't. Relax. I know what guys want to hear, he said. Takahashi snickered under his breath. I raised my head from my hands and raised an eyebrow. From girls, though. He glanced down at me from my phone. I mean, he paused. Takahashi sat on my desk, completely motionless, and blinked. After a few seconds, he tilted his head. It's basically the same thing, right? While I had Takahashi distracted by my question, I snatched my phone from his hands. I don't need help. This time, I made sure my voice was stern to show him I was serious. Takahashi reached out for the phone, insisting that I did need help. I dropped my cell down my shirt. The cold plastic pressed against my skin and smiled victoriously at him. Takahashi shrugged. Oh well, what can you do? The smile on my face faded a bit. His relaxed demeanor was off-putting. It suddenly didn't feel like I won anymore. I opened my mouth to speak. A low rumble suddenly tickled my skin, and I jumped. I swiveled my chair to face away from Takahashi and pulled the phone out from under my shirt. Eyes wide and mouth hung open, I stared at the text I did not send and the reply I got back from Hizashi. My vision blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. It was hard to breathe. Even so, I used the remaining air in my lungs to speak. I hate you so much right now. My back faced Takahashi, oblivious to my near-crying state. Takahashi laughed in the background. He playfully taunted me as he proudly explained that he was actually sending a text rather than looking at my pictures. Takahashi got up from the top of my desk. What did he say? Yes? I bet he said yes. My face heated up, and a tear rolled down my cheek as his footsteps circled in front of me. His shadow loomed over me. The air was weighted. We both went silent. Now only the steady ticks from the wall clock filled the room. I went too far again. His voice was solemn. A warm finger brushed up under my eye while a hand rubbed my arm. Takahashi knelt before me and apologized in a somber tone. My face was reflected in his eyes. Seeing myself in such a pitiful state, I took a deep breath. I'm fine. Takahashi had a concerned look on his face. I'm all right, really, I repeated. Takahashi got up. My eyes traveled down to the phone sitting on my lap. Hey, Taka. The dark-haired male turned around and glanced down at me. He said yes. Takahashi smiled and congratulated me with a gentle tone. How about we meet there? I unlocked my phone and read the text message. It was followed by an address. Sounds good. I placed the phone off to the side and stretched. My skin rubbed up against my bedsheets as I rolled onto my stomach. Holding myself up with my elbows, I nudged the phone closer and looked up the address Hizashi supplied me. I scrolled through the string of texts sent and received over the past few days, starting with the message Takahashi sent for me. "Hey, wanna go do something this weekend?" It was followed by a wink and kissy face. I shuddered at the message, noting that the faces were a bit too much. Further down, Hizashi began to ask questions, whether I liked crowded or more secluded areas, what my opinions were of Tokyo, and the like. Hizashi insisted on planning the whole thing all by himself. My head was pounding. A sickness was growing from my core. I quickly switched conversations to Takahashi. "I don't feel good. Maybe I should reschedule." "No." The text message was a wall of no's. "You're not sick. You know this. I know this. You're just mentally trying to get out of this. Just breathe. When you're ready, go find something cute to wear." My eyes were fixed to the wall in front of me. I observed the paint's texture, imagining little shapes like clouds. My phone vibrated. It was hard to tell if it was going to be from Takahashi or Hizashi. The sickness grew as I got out of bed. My eyes scanned the clothes hanging, and my fingers lightly touched the fabrics, pulling on the ones that caught my attention. With an armful of clothes, I held them up in pairs and by themselves before the mirror. After debating for what felt like an eternity, I picked out a tank top and jacket. With one decision done, I moved on to the next. I fumbled with the zipper, pulling it up and down while taking pauses in between. The zipper slid to the top. No, why did I bother picking out this top if I'm gonna cover it? I moved the zipper to the bottom, tilting my head, as I decided how I felt about keeping the jacket unzipped. I dunno, maybe. Once again, I pulled the zipper up but stopped halfway. It looks like I'm trying to draw attention to my chest. My face flushed, and I quickly unzipped the jacket. I collected my things into my purse as I walked out. The sun's warmth hit my skin as I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. A gentle breeze cooled my skin. I breathed in the scent of my neighbor's flowers as the wind carried it towards my direction. Accompanied by the flowers, I noticed the sweet smell of apples from the tree in their backyard, and I could almost taste them. I maintained two entirely different conversations while I rode on the bullet train. One was with Hizashi, where I cautiously tried to sound eager without sounding too excited. The other was with Takahashi, where I freaked out as we chatted like a pair of teens. I found the meeting spot. It was a shopping district bustling with people. An empty bench stood a distance away from the crowd. Takahashi and I talked via text as I waited for Hizashi to find me. "Hey there, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃." I looked up and needed a moment to register who exactly I was looking at. "Do I?" I stopped myself and stared into the emerald eyes looking back at me. Hizashi was dressed in a simple t-shirt with a jacket over it, and his hair tied back into a ponytail, a loose strand hung by his face. His orange sunglasses were replaced with a pair of red-framed glasses. A bag was slung over his shoulder. I found myself staring into his eyes for longer than I should have, just now noticing how much his orange glasses obscured them. One thought ran through my head. "Oh no, he's really cute." I fumbled with my phone as I put it away, not breaking my eye contact with him. It slipped from my fingers and fell to the ground. My soul cringed as soon as I heard the sound of it hitting the pavement. A nervous chuckle escaped my lips. "Hi, hello, how are you?" I stammered. "Doing great." He reached down and picked up my phone. Hizashi held it in front of me. I thanked him as I carefully placed it into my purse. "No problemo." Hizashi and I walked together. I wasn't very close to him, just enough that others could tell I was walking with him. "Dig this, I got a few things planned out." He had a smile on his face that felt like it was different from what I've seen before. "Can I get a hint?" I asked. He shook his head. He gave off an air of playfulness. He suddenly stopped. I took a few steps forward before stopping as well. He pointed to the store beside him. The unlit neon sign above the door read tunes. "I'm into music. You're into music." It seemed like an obvious stop. The door beeped as Hizashi swung it open and held it for me. I thanked him as I passed by and stepped inside. The walls were lined with framed vinyl records. Some were decorated with metal frames while others were decorated themselves with gold leaf. The parts that didn't have any hung decorations were lined with what appeared to be foam padding frequently used for soundproofing. The center was filled with stands alphabetically labeled from alternative to zydeco. A lone record player stood in the far back corner. The store was empty, with only one exception. Behind the counter stood a man that appeared to be Hizashi's age. The man was on the shorter side. The tattoos that covered almost every inch of both his arms caught my attention. He was looking directly at the door when we stepped in with intensely piercing eyes. Hizashi invited me to look around. The first stop was to the stand labeled with my favorite music genre. I skimmed through the records, realizing that the selection was scarce at best. 5 or 6 albums were dedicated to each label. As I looked, Hizashi's voice rung out from the other side of the room. I peeked over my shoulder. He was talking to the dark-haired man standing behind the counter. It was hard to hear what the two were talking about. Hizashi leaned forward and whispered something to him. The man let out a gruff chuckle in return. I slowly weaved between the stands and approached another selection. My fingers carefully flipped through the small set of 4 vinyl records. My attention snapped back over to Hizashi and the man. The two were still talking, and I couldn't stop watching. "Stop it," Holding an album in my hands, I observed the art on the front. It had a dark underwater painting. Just staring at it made me feel lightheaded. The sensation of butterflies in my stomach grew as my eyes fixed to the image in my hand. However, I couldn't stop staring at it. Have you heard of these guys? I jumped. Hizashi immediately apologized for sneaking up on me. It's fine. Really, I chuckled, trying to pass off my nervous laugh as me trying to hide my heart racing from myself. He had an album in his hand. The cover was a colorful nod to psychedelic-styled art. Various shades of greens, pinks, and oranges swirled together in a way that drew my eye to the name of the album and band printed in a white bubble font in the center. I admitted that I've never heard of them. Hizashi led me to the record player. He slid the black disc out of its sleeve and gingerly held onto it. Music filled the small store. I commented on the gentle piano playing along to the drumbeat, and Hizashi talked a little bit about the genre. The blonde hero's face tinted pink as he spoke. While the first song quieted down to a stop, Hizashi lamented about record stores like this one becoming a rarity. It was apparent that Hizashi came here frequently. He explained that the selection per genre was so small to highlight a few artists at a time. Hizashi motioned his eyes to the man behind the counter and told me that the store changed stock entirely every month. The blonde hero added that once an album was gone, it was near impossible to buy it at this store again. From what I learned, this store single-handedly supplies the music for Put Your Hands Up radio. Hizashi and I spoke about various genres as we browsed the store. He pointed to an album from time to time, mentioning that he might buy it for his radio station. I considered buying one as well, but I didn't own a record player. Helping Hizashi decide which ones he should get was the next best thing. How about we head on out? I'm kinda hungry. After looking around, Hizashi was leaving empty-handed. Sounds good. I followed Hizashi to the counter. I took one last look at everything as we walked by. He said goodbye to the man behind the counter and informed him that he was going to come back soon. Hizashi vaguely thanked him for something. I wonder what that's about. The blonde hero paused. He asked the man if he had the thing he ordered a few days ago. The man reached under the counter and pulled out a vinyl record tucked away in its sleeve. Hizashi's eyes lit up as the man placed it into a bag. I was glad Hizashi was leaving the shop with something after all. Hizashi led me down the road. He was carrying the bag he got from the record store in one hand. In the other, he held onto a strap from the bag slung over his shoulder. I offered to help carry one of them, and Hizashi handed me the one on his shoulder. As soon as Hizashi let go of the strap, I felt my arm instantly fall under the weight of the bag. He quickly caught hold of the strap before it touched the ground. The blonde hero chuckled and apologized as he slung it back over his shoulder. I offered to carry the much lighter bag in his other hand, but he waved it off, adding that he was fine. The hero took me to a little cafe. I followed him as he walked to a table in the far corner in the back. I glanced around the room as I sat down. You seem to like sitting in the back corner. I want to keep autograph signing to a minimum today. His face reddened a little bit. Hizashi fumbled with the cloth napkin in front of him as he folded and unfolded a corner repeatedly. He kept his eyes down towards his hands. I cocked my head to the side and leaned forward a bit. Have you ever been here before? I've passed by a few times. Never been in. I can't really say this is my kind of crowd. Hizashi cleared his throat. He wrapped a stray hair around his finger. The two of us went quiet. It was a rarity to see Hizashi so silent. So, how's work? Fine. The tension in the air was thick. I've been trying to think of any interesting stories from work. Remember anything? He asked. I shook my head. Unfortunately not. He leaned back, and I tried to gauge how disappointed he must be feeling right now. How about you? I paused. All of them, I guess. Hizashi held up his index finger. Well, I'm not really an active hero, I guess. I don't go on patrol anymore. If a situation where a hero is needed shows up and I'm in the general area, I'll rock the scene, though. He raised another finger. The radio station is the same as always. I need a new gimmick for my next event, but I got some time to think it over. Hizashi raised a third finger. It's almost summer, so I'm gonna have a bit of free time here in a bit with my mini listeners gone from school. My teeth lightly grazed my lip, suppressing a smile. Mini listeners, I see. You must like to keep busy. He smiled and gave a nod. Once again, the two of us went quiet. The silence was broken when a young girl approached our table. She pulled back her brown hair behind her ears and pulled out a pen and notepad. I stopped breathing for a second, realizing I hadn't looked at the menu. Hizashi turned his menu towards the girl. His finger ran along the front. She took quick glances towards Hizashi before returning back to her notepad. Thank you, he whispered. Hizashi handed both menus to the girl. What did you end up ordering? I leaned forward and tilted my head to the side. Hizashi looked away. He returned to playing with the cloth napkin in his hands. Oh, nothing special. The waitress returned with an assortment of things. I found my favorite tea and cookies expertly placed on a plate with blue trim. Just looking at everything Hizashi ordered reminded me of something 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗵 said. He's good at remembering small details. The air around the table smelled sweet. I couldn't resist the muffin sitting in front of me. My eyes darted from Hizashi to what was sitting in front of him. He had what kinds of things I liked practically memorized. I tried to take notice of what he had in return. Berries seemed to be a theme. Hizashi had a blueberry muffin, a slice of strawberry cake, and what appeared to be a drink colored with blackberries. Things relaxed as soon as the treats showed up. Hizashi had stopped fumbling with the napkin and got back to his usual, talkative self. Although it was a little too early, I asked him if he had any summer plans. Hizashi leaned back and sighed. Grading. He mentioned that he procrastinates grading homework until long breaks like summer and winter break to catch up on grading tests and homework. The blonde hero already looked tired, just thinking about it. I wish I could help. I inquired about the other teachers. He seemed like good friends with 𝗵𝗃 and Aizawa. Surely one of them would be willing to help him out. Hizashi shook his head. 𝗵𝗃 seemingly disappears during the summer. The blonde hero talked a little bit about the hero course summer camp that Aizawa was in charge of this year. I asked Hizashi if he had to go to something like that when he was a student. He nodded with a broad smile. My question opened a floodgate. The hero recalled many stories of him and Aizawa going to the yearly camp. I kept a smile on my face as I listened, but my insides were pained just a bit from his stories. The familiar sting I felt whenever I thought about what could have been. If I had the opportunity, I was nearly positive I would have wanted to go to something like that when I was a teenager. A low rumble shook the walls and tables violently for a moment. Across the cafe, the cabinet filled with decorative porcelain plates and cups on display toppled onto the ground with a crash. Voices from the other patrons murmuring amongst themselves filled the room. Children were crying, and their parents were trying to ease them. My attention moved to Hizashi. Earthquake. His face looked grim, and his eyes lost their sparkle. The usually carefree hero had a deepened frown as he looked down at his phone, sitting next to him. Hizashi slid out of his seat and walked over to an empty table and stood on top. He took a breath before raising his voice over the growing sound of concerned patrons. His smile returned. Hey, how's everyone feelin' this afternoon? In an instant, everyone was silenced. All eyes were on the blonde man standing on the table. I just got word that there is a villain attack nearby. But don't you fret, dear listeners. Heroes are on the way to take that baddie down. The voices began to speak up. What do you think we should do? One voice next to me whispered. Do you think the trains will be closed? Another whispered. Now, Hizashi yelled. His voice was calm. We need you all to stay still. It's the safest move for everyone. Once again, the patrons went silent. The blonde hero stepped down from the table and approached me. He reached out for the bag he had given me earlier and opened it up. He replaced his red-framed glasses with those familiar pair of orange-tinted sunglasses. Hizashi pulled out the device he wore around his neck and placed it on. Stay safe, I'll be back, Hizashi whispered. I nodded and watched him turn back to everyone else. Present Mike is taking the stage. You all stay put, I'll come back when it's safe. The room was dead silent, but the look on the patrons' faces seemed relieved. The young children who were previously crying were now happily bouncing about and tugging on their parents' sleeves as they pointed towards the blonde hero. Hizashi stepped outside. The sound of the door closing boomed around the cafe. Without looking, I knew there were at least a few eyes looking in my direction. My stomach turned, and I slumped into my chair in an attempt to avoid their gaze. I fidgeted with my fingers, my foot lightly tapping. Beside me, I looked out the window and watched Hizashi vanish into the distance. You be careful too. A do-over. Sure, sounds good. Chapter text. I tapped my nails against the table while I waited. Behind me, people were whispering among themselves. A woman was talking on the phone, informing someone of the villain attack and that she was going to be late somewhere. The faint sound of a news report was playing from the other side of the room. I crossed my arms across my chest and slouched into my seat. My foot tapped on the tiled floor below me. However, the pounding in my chest boomed in my ears. Hopefully, he's okay. Time seemed like it was crawling along. After the initial rumble, the cafe has been quiet since. There haven't been any indicators that the attack was shifting towards the cafe. I found myself looking out the window, expecting to see an uninjured Hizashi walking back to announce that it was safe. The more I looked out the window, the more I began to worry about Hizashi's safety, as well for the innocent people who were unfortunately nearby the attack. There are few villain wards in Japan. This city fell under my district. It made me anxious to think that both Hizashi and the villain could have hurt each other. Meaning, I'd find myself taking care of the villain. My job suddenly made me feel on edge. That's never happened before. This was a new feeling. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to treat a villain who happened to hurt someone I personally knew. Usually, I don't think about that sort of thing. To see the human behind the villainous acts, I tossed the word victim from my vocabulary for a few hours a day. For the first time, something about that felt very wrong. I shifted in my seat and sat up. Once again, I returned to tapping on the table. My attention moved to the faint sound of a reporter talking about the situation. "Oh, look at all the heroes, Grandma," a little voice chirped. It was followed by the sound of a much older person hushing them. I tried to tune out everyone's voices and focus in on the report. Knowing that more than one hero was on the scene, both eased and worried me. Why would they need more than one hero for a villain? I found myself growing anxious. The reporter's voice was being buried by the sounds in the cafe. People talking on the phone, porcelain being cleaned up from the floor, kids complaining that they were bored. It was too hard to hear. I caught small bits of the report. 2 words cleared a few things up for me. Gigantification quirk. That explained both the rumble and why so many heroes were needed. By the sounds of it, the hero was subdued and was currently being taken away. I knew exactly where he was going to. The air felt lighter, and I was instantly at ease. My phone rang. How odd, Takahashi never calls me. "Hello," I answered. "Please tell me you weren't near that villain attack." Takahashi sounded worried. I was both happy he called to check up on me but also upset with myself for not thinking of letting him know what was going on. "I'm safe, really, it's okay." Before I could say any more, Takahashi went on a tangent about how he happened to see the villain attack live on TV. He spotted Hizashi in the fight, and he got worried. I reminded Takahashi that I had just told him I was okay. He left to go see what was happening, I said. Little did I know, I had just opened a floodgate. "Excuse me, in the middle of your date. Don't heroes have days off?" I covered my mouth and stifled a laugh. "Takahashi," I began, "calm down, it's all right. Making sure people are safe is way more important than a silly date. That's nothing to get upset over." On the other end, Takahashi sighed. "Right, sure." He paused. "Hey, just so you know, he looked real good on TV just now." Even though he couldn't see it, I smiled. "I'm sure he does." A lighthearted chuckle rang out from my phone. All jokes aside, Takashi's comment made me feel better. Now I knew Hizashi wasn't hurt. I couldn't thank him enough for putting my mind at ease. Part of me wondered if that's why he made the comment in the first place. "Do you want me to stay on the line with you? At least until Hero Boy comes back?" I groaned. "Sorry, something told me he wasn't." "It's all right. I'll just wait for Hizashi to come back on my own. You go back to doing whatever you were doing." We exchanged goodbyes and hung up. I tucked my phone away and looked out the window. As silly as it sounded, I tried imagining what I should say to Hizashi. I didn't want to sound too worried or too lax about the situation and his well-being. "I'm glad you're safe," I whispered. Resting my head on my hands, I hummed and thought. That didn't sound right. I wasn't sure why, though. Maybe. I paused. Thankfully, we were nearby. No, that's not right either. I zoned out, trying to think of the perfect thing to say when Hizashi returned. Voices caught my attention, and I turned around. A few of the people who were waiting in the cafe were suddenly huddled together. Hizashi was in the center of the crowd, smiling and waving. People were asking for pictures. Hizashi motioned towards his outfit and joked that he wasn't dressed for the occasion but obliged anyway. Other people asked for an autograph. That, Hizashi had no problem doing. I sat at a distance and watched Hizashi. He was happily signing autographs, taking pictures, and having conversations with everyone. At one point, one of the kids wanted to play, so he carried the young toddler on his shoulders while he talked to their parents. I rested my head in my hands. He really seems like he's in his element. After everyone settled down, Hizashi informed the crowd that the villain was successfully detained and that there were no casualties. The voices began to grow louder in a slow, yet cheerful, crescendo. Even though I already knew the outcome of the villain attack, thanks to Takahashi, it was still a relief hearing it from Hizashi's mouth. I yawned as I watched the last of the patrons get their autographs. According to my phone, he's been doing this for nearly an hour. The ones who wanted to speak with him ate up the most time. Eventually, people got their fill and were beginning to slowly disperse from the cafe. Employees were chatting amongst each other as they cleaned up the mess from the initial rumble. A few of the waitresses were still talking about Hizashi. They seemed to like how personable he is. Most of them whispered about how thankful they were that a hero was around to calm everyone down. Now, it was just the two of us left. I sat motionlessly. My eyes and Hizashi's met, and we both froze. The blonde hero was the first to break the stare down. He removed the device around his neck. Hizashi held it in his arms as his head hung low. He had a frown on his face, and his green eyes flickered in my direction, occasionally. He took cautious steps in my direction and stopped next to the table. "Sorry," Hizashi said. "Sorry," I repeated. I leaned forward and tilted my head. Hizashi wouldn't make eye contact. He kept his gaze low to the ground. He placed the device on the table. His fingers played with the various buttons and switches on the side. "I guess I messed up big time back there." "How so?" I picked my tone cautiously. I didn't want to sound like I blamed Hizashi for anything, and wanted him to explain his supposed wrongdoing. Still, I couldn't fathom why he would apologize for leaving. There were plenty of heroes nearby. I didn't have to go. That was silly, and I told him I thought so. I explained that I would have preferred he go just to be on the safe side. His expression remained entirely unchanged, and then I spent all that time on autographs and stuff. That had to be annoying. While I understood where he was coming from with his last point, it didn't bother me in the slightest. Heroes are supposed to make people feel happy and safe. He was simply doing his job. I paused for a moment and tried to think of the best thing to say, right here and now. I gave Hizashi a warm smile. Actually, I thought you looked pretty cool. Hizashi's face lit up. He turned away and ran his fingers along the back of his neck for a moment. He glanced over to me. Well, I say this date was kinda a flop. I opened my mouth to inform him that I didn't feel that way, but he continued talking. So, how about a do-over? Why not? My smile widened. Hizashi placed the device back into his bag. I noted that it was a good thing he brought it, although admittedly, I had no idea what it did. Hizashi chuckled, and a lump formed in my throat. I began to worry that I said something stupid. Oh no. Hopefully, it's not just for aesthetics. I might not be an active hero, but I like to be prepared, just in case. He removed his sunglasses and replaced them with his red-framed glasses. He slung the bag over his shoulder. So, how about I start making up for today by offering you a ride home? As much as I wanted to insist that today was perfectly fine, I decided to play along. Getting a ride home definitely sounded better than taking the train. Sounds like a plan. I stood up and stretched. My legs were weak from all the sitting around. We walked side by side to his car. I asked about the villain attack, and Hizashi enthusiastically gave me a play-by-play of what went down. His enthusiasm wavered a bit when he talked about his part. He was mostly in charge of leading people around to safety because he was the only one capable of projecting his voice over the panicked masses. I know, it doesn't sound as interesting as taking down the villain myself, he said. I cut him off. What? No, you were helping to reduce the casualties. That's far more important. Hizashi's face reddened. He looked dumbfounded for a moment before thanking me. He didn't need to thank me for something like that. Way back when I was dreaming of being a hero, I always thought I'd be using my quirk for something like that. A quirk like mine that can affect everyone in hearing range was dangerous in a fight. I knew calming the victims down would have most likely been my main job. Hizashi still didn't know about that part of my life, so I decided to keep my thoughts to myself. That was a story for another day. Hizashi led me to a little red car. It was well polished with not a single sign of dirt on it. The vehicle almost looked like it just came out of the dealership. However, the inside was a slightly different story. The front was organized, yet the back seats were filled with piles of papers, books, and notepads that spilled onto the floor. Sorry about that mess, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃. My gaze shot from the backseat collection to Hizashi. I was about to apologize for staring, but he continued talking. I keep my school stuff in here. Lesson plans, homework, and tests I need to grade, stuff like that. I keep those in my car, so I can try to chip away at the mountain while I'm at home or in the studio. Hizashi placed the bag that hung from his shoulder and the one he held in his hand in the trunk before unlocking the doors. I anxiously stood and waited for him to get in before I did. As Hizashi drove, he pointed to a small cord neatly wrapped up, offering to let me pick the music. I agreed, and we listened to songs on my phone while I vaguely gave him directions back to my house. We pulled up to my house. I thanked Hizashi for the ride and swung the door open. My door closed, and the sound of another car door closing followed shortly. I spun around and noticed Hizashi was digging through his trunk. He pulled out the plastic bag he's been carrying around since the record shop. Bag in hand, he stood in front of me. He seemed to be looking everywhere, but at me. Hizashi hummed for a moment. Here, he held the mysterious plastic bag in front of me. For you. I meant to give it to you at the cafe, but then, well, you know. I smiled at him and took the bag in my hands. Thank you. I opened the plastic bag and pulled out what was inside. In my hands was exactly what I thought it would be. A vinyl record tucked tightly in its jacket. I studied the cover and noticed a band name wasn't printed on the front. Instead, there was a beautifully painted bird on the cover with an intricate border decorating the edge. I turned it around to look at the song list, wondering if there was a hint as to whose record this was. The song list was a wide variety of different songs from different artists. I was familiar with all of them. Did he make me a custom record? I suddenly thought back to every cheesy romance movie and show I've seen where mixtapes were made and exchanged. At the time, I always thought it was cliché. Now that it was actually happening to me, I was surprisingly okay with it. Part of me was sure it was because of Hizashi, and the other half was because I didn't know it was possible to make custom vinyl records. This is really sweet, thank you. Hizashi's eyes lit up. Really? I nodded. He cleared his throat and smiled. We stood in front of my house for a moment, neither of us talking. A cold breeze lightly passed by us, but I felt warm. Warmer than I've ever been, in fact. I didn't have anything to say, but I allowed myself to try to speak. Hizashi smiled at me. I should let you go. You have work early tomorrow, right? I'll text you the details about that do-over. I nodded. Hizashi turned around and headed back into his car. He waved at me before speeding off into the distance. I hugged the record in my arms as I walked to my front door. Loud thumping roared into my ears as I walked. For a moment, I wasn't sure if the noise was my footsteps or if it was my heartbeats. Now inside, I held the record in my hands and looked down at it. My brain was a storm. There were too many thoughts racing through my mind, fighting for my attention. How the date went and how it got interrupted. How sweet Hizashi was and how nervous I felt. Suddenly, I began to think about the gift I've been mindlessly holding. I scanned around the room from where I was standing. I really wish I owned a record player, I said. 𝗵𝘃𝗃 shrugged. He sat on the edge of my desk and reached for a pen. He clicked the pen as I explained that it might be weird framing the record. So, he got you a gift. And you secured a second date. Takahashi's tone was off. It almost sounded like he was trying to hide something. Whatever it was, I knew it wasn't going to be good. The pen clicking slowed to a stop. And how was that first kiss? There it was. That didn't take long. I pondered what to say. Obviously, I knew I had no reason to lie to Takahashi. We didn't kiss. Well, Takahashi repeated. Well, what? It was that awful. I shook my head. He leaned in close to my face. His pink eyes narrowed. My face was reflected in his eyes. The warmth of Takahashi's skin emanated onto mine, and his breath brushed against my cheek. The focused look on his face shifted to something close to pity. Please don't tell me it didn't happen. Okay, I won't, I replied. I immediately stayed silent and folded my hands on the desk. He sat up straight and sighed. Why are you so bad at socializing? I tried to argue that I wasn't, but Takahashi clearly wasn't listening. While the first date is ending is the best time to have your first kiss. Your next date coming up, you better kiss him. I'll lock you two in a room together if you don't. Takahashi sounded playful, but that was a guise. I knew him well enough to know that was a legitimate threat that he would absolutely try to pull off if given a chance. I leaned forward and rested my head in my hands. You're basically a villain, you know. Takahashi snickered under his breath. That's okay, you like villains. So it's not like we still can't be friends. I shook my head and rolled my eyes. I don't like villains, I murmured. Takahashi sat up straight and crossed his arms. He raised a brow at me with his trademark playful smirk. Okay, fine. Some villains are all right. You just happen to be my favorite one, though. I got up from my desk and excused myself. It was time to administer medications. I walked down towards the kitchen to borrow a small bribe from the fridge. Up ahead, I noticed a nurse with a clipboard in her hand, standing in front of a window. She tucked a light green lock behind her ear as she scribbled on the paper in front of her. I took a peek at the villain as I passed by. It was the villain that interrupted my date. He was lying in his medical bed, completely unconscious with a steady stream of medication running through him via an IV. That was the standard protocol for a villain with a gigantification-type quirk. I took a turn and found my way down the white hallways to the kitchen. As usual, I made sure no one was around when I swiped my treat. I placed the bag of gummy candies in my coat and tiptoed away before anyone noticed me. Acting like I didn't just break yet another rule, I collected a tray lined with small cups. I waited for the light above the door handle to blink green. The door swung open, and I stepped inside. Miss Ishihara, I have your vitamins and medications. I sat next to the thin woman sitting in her medical bed. She had an arm cuffed to the metal railing, which stopped her from getting onto her feet. I noticed she had a deep frown on her face as I placed one of the many tiny cups in her free hand. Oh, come on, don't be like that, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the treat. This is for you if you take your pills. Fine, she grumbled. I bit my lip, hiding a smile. I knew this trick would work. Ishihara loved sweets. We talked as she swallowed down her pills. Being detained, she now misses episodes of her favorite show. I've been watching it and telling her what happened since she fell under my care. As she snacked on her treats, she asked me if I could somehow sneak a TV into her room. I hummed and thought about it. It would be hard, but I'd be willing to try before she's taken away. I collected the cups into a pile on the tray and stepped out of the room. As usual, I tried to pull the door open to make sure it was properly locked. It didn't move. My phone rumbled in my pocket. As I threw away the cups and placed the metal tray in the bin, I took a look at my text message. Of course, it was from Hizashi. A smile crossed my lips as soon as I opened the picture he sent me. Hizashi was posing with a student in a UA uniform. The caption read, "Meet my intern." It was apparent by both the massive smile on the student's face and the playful pose that he gave off the same hyper energy as Hizashi. I cooed. They looked good together, a perfect fit. I turned off my phone and put it away before anyone had a chance to notice I was texting instead of working. Returning to my clipboard, I crossed off Miss Ishihara's name and looked at the one below it. I smiled to myself. Thankfully, I don't have to bribe this next one. My week with the Hero Killer chapter texts say, I leaned forward and tilted my head to the side. With a small metal rod, I nudged the villain's tongue, searching his mouth for unswallowed pills. Sitting up straight, I jotted down that the patient took all his medications with no fuss. "All right, I'm all done here," I announced. The man sitting in the medical bed had a broken arm. From what I heard, when he came in, his arm was mangled and bending the wrong way. Other than reasonable discomfort, he was in good condition. "This villain won't be here for very long." I tried to budge the door behind me before turning around. My back pressed against the door. The glass cooled my skin as I initialed the villain's release form. "Hey," Takahashi's voice called out. I kept my head down and greeted him. "How's that second date coming along? I told you yesterday." "He's too busy with his intern." A pale hand covered over my paperwork. I looked up. Takahashi was standing in front of me with a determined look on his face. "Still, for how much longer?" he asked. I sighed and lowered my clipboard. "It's only a week long." It seemed like Takahashi was getting restless, waiting for new things to develop between Hizashi and I. However, telling him to calm down made me feel like a hypocrite. Sometimes, it was like I'm more anxious than him about the whole thing. Unlike Takahashi, I tried to stay quiet about it. Hizashi has been busy with his intern for the past few days. While he has his little shadow behind him, Hizashi had to go out on patrols more often. His patrols, on top of everything else he does, meant the blonde hero didn't have as much time to spare. Today marked intern week's second day. My conversations with Hizashi have been limited to virtually nothing. Sometimes, he'd send me pictures or small updates, cataloging him and his intern's adventures. I, on the other hand, wanted Hizashi to put all of his attention into his intern, so I kept my replies limited. A finger lightly jamming at my cheek brought my attention back into the present. Takahashi was looking at me with a small smirk on his face. "Do you miss him yet?" Face red, I made an attempt to bat Takahashi's hand away. Of course, he evaded me effortlessly. He snickered under his breath. "You totally miss him." "Totally. Don't blow things out of proportion." "It's not like we're a couple," I said. Takahashi's mischievous grin widened. That smile could only mean one thing. Takahashi was going to poke fun at me for something. Before he had a chance to say anything, I stopped him and told him I had to finish my tasks for the morning. As I walked away from my friend, his voice called out after me. "You can't hide from me forever." Takahashi's joking aside, the day was fairly routine, albeit a little quiet. As I sat down on the train home, I navigated to the last message Hizashi sent me. I received it early this morning. Things were admittedly a little lonely without our afternoon conversations. Buildings and trees flew by as the train went. A rumble beneath my feet distracted me from the severe overcrowding on the train. I wondered if I should message Hizashi and check up on him and his intern. I typed up a quick hello text before promptly deleting it. I wish I had Takahashi's confidence. Once I got home, I searched my fridge for something to make for dinner. Empty. I sighed. I sat down on the floor in front of the TV. On the coffee table, I placed down a bowl of cereal and a mug of hot chocolate. The warm chocolate milk ran down my throat as I flipped through the channels. A news report caught my eye. There was too much flashing on the screen at once. One moment, a street engulfed in flames. In the next, horrifying monsters were being held down by heroes. "What is the world coming to?" I mumbled. The reporter talked about two mysterious figures found near the chaos. The visuals switched to a pair of men standing on a rooftop caught through a news helicopter. One, a man who appeared to be a living shadow. The other was a man with blue hair wearing all black. The two villains' screen time was cut short. After just a brief moment, the report switched over to the hero killer, Stain. I sat motionless as I watched the scene unfold. Bloodied and battered, the man stepped forward in a crazed frenzy, ranting and raving about heroes. His speech ended, and the report closed with two news anchors sitting behind their desks. Was I breathing? By the time the hero killer's rant had finished, I found myself vacantly watching. My mouth was left wide open, and my hands froze in place. My attention returned to the spoon in my hand. I gently stirred the cereal in the bowl, saving the bits at the bottom from becoming too soggy. Meanwhile, the villain's words swirled around in my head. As much as I hated to admit it, he had a point. A small hint of guilt came to the surface. Does agreeing with Stain mean I didn't think Hizashi deserved to be a hero? I grabbed the remote and changed it to cartoons. Don't be ridiculous. That's not what that means at all. A pathetic, self-conscious laugh escaped my mouth. All right, villain lover, this one is for you. Takahashi placed a clipboard in front of me. Villain what? My brows furrowed at Takahashi. I knew he was joking. Still, he said it far too loud for my liking. I took the clipboard and looked down at it. 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗲. His alias, Stain. My eyes widened. I'm getting the hero killer. Takahashi's hand landed on my shoulder. Don't sound too excited there. I cleared my throat and apologized. From what I hear, they want him to be a quick in-and-out visit. Have you seen the condition he was in last night? I asked. I recalled his speech from the night before. It played again on the news this morning, and a few kids were watching it on the train. Takahashi admitted that he made a slight detour and passed by his room out of pure curiosity earlier. You're kinda the resident villain expert, so you can have him. He's kinda creepy. I reread his file and looked up at Takahashi. It's not like I have a choice. I found myself in front of room 70. As I waited for the familiar green light above the handle, I looked around the unfamiliar halls. It was rare for anyone to be assigned to 𝗵𝘃𝗲. It was deep into the ward and very out of the way. The flashing green light in the corner of my eye caught my attention. The entry protocol was a little different in this half of the ward. Instead of merely waiting for the light and entering, a code must be used. I typed my PIN number into the keypad and waited for a click. The door handle turned, and I swung the door open. I came face to face with a man sitting in a medical bed. His arms were bound by some sort of metal contraption that wrapped around his torso. I couldn't get a good look at his face. He was looking down, and his black hair draped over him. "Mr. Akaguro," I began. His head lifted up. There was a lot of hate behind his sharpened red eyes. Just the sight of them made my chest heavy. Suddenly, it felt like it wasn't just me and Stain in the room. I turned to the side and jumped. A little squeak escaped. My clipboard fell to the ground as I covered my mouth and slid closer to the villain. Hands still covering my mouth, I stared at the figure next to me. Sorry, I said. The security guard gave me a nod and returned to staring at Stain. I approached the villain and retrieved my clipboard from the ground. Using my foot, I nudged a chair close to him. As I sat by his side, I noticed the villain's hate-filled eyes remained forward. I followed his gaze to the officer standing on the other side of the room. The tension in the air was high. It was hard to concentrate. I tried to lighten the mood by introducing myself to Stain. He remained quiet, his eyes still on the officer. I reached out and touched the metal contraption keeping the villain bound. "Don't touch that," the officer demanded. I jumped. My hands immediately returned to my lap. I can't work like this. Taking a look at the villain in front of me and then returning to the officer, I cleared my throat. Reaching into my coat pocket, I pulled out a card. "Excuse me, sir." Getting to my feet, I approached the officer and handed him my quirk usage approval card. "I think it would be best for everyone if I used my quirk." The officer scanned my card. His eyes darted around, undoubtedly looking for a reason as to why I wouldn't be allowed to do so. He returned my card. "Go on ahead. Actually, I can't use it with you in the room." I took my card from him and returned it to my pocket. "It affects everyone in hearing range. That would include you. If you don't mind, can you step out of the room?" The officer looked at the villain behind me. I reassured him that I will be fine, somewhat reluctantly. He turned and stepped outside. As soon as the door closed, I locked it before he had a chance to notice, effectively disabling the keypad on the other side. I gave him a smile and a friendly wave as I pulled the curtain across the glass wall, giving Stain and I some privacy. It's all about earning some trust. I turned to the villain and approached him cautiously. "Let's try this again," I said. Once again, I introduced myself to Stain. His eyes followed my every movement. At least this time around, he was actively paying attention. I sat down next to him. "You said you were going to use your quirk. What does it do?" I gave him a smile and placed a finger across my lips. Just a little fib to get him out of the room. There was still a lot of anger in the man's eyes, however. That hate I saw earlier seemed to have dwindled away. "It seems awfully foolish to act so nonchalant with a murderer in the room and lock out your only protection." I placed my clipboard on my lap and debated whether or not he was trying to threaten me. "You only kill heroes, right?" I let out a small giggle. "That's certainly not me." I took a metal probe. Before doing anything with it, I explained that I will be placing it on his forehead to take his temperature. I tilted my head to the side. "Is that okay with you?" Stain remained quiet. I did exactly as I said I would. My fingers tangled into Stain's hair as I placed the metal probe on his forehead. A low beep went off, and I removed the device and put it away. 96.7 degrees. "Looks like you're healthy there." I was surprised by how little he was talking. For some reason, I expected him to say more. I pulled out a syringe and stared at him. The device around him covered his arms. How am I supposed to put an IV in? The papers on my clipboard didn't come with any particular directions. Well, it looks like I'm in a bit of a bind here. I slumped into my seat and clicked the pen in my hand as I thought about how I'd tackle this. I placed my hands on his restraints. "How do I open this?" "Foolishness is no replacement for bravery." Stain's words caught my attention. I looked up at him and saw him glare in my direction. I repeated my point from earlier. "I thought you only attack heroes. I can make an exception for girls willing to step in my way and keep me from my freedom." His tongue poked out from between his lips. I moved my hand away from the metal restraints. "All right, point taken." I sighed and studied his current state. After going through all that, I found myself back at square one. Where should that IV go? The mental gymnastics alone was enough to make me internally scream. After debating, I settled on 2 other locations to run the villain's IV. I looked him in the eyes. "Thigh or neck, your pick." I motioned my head towards the bag of clear liquid hung by his bedside. As I did so, I added that I'm not technically supposed to give options, but it was going to be our little secret. 𝗵𝗃 replied. I noticed he sounded reluctant to talk to me. It was better than him being threatening. We're on the right track. I did as he said and inserted the needle into his neck. He stayed completely motionless. As I pulled out the syringe and taped up the small plastic tube that was now attached to his neck, I smiled. Not even a flinch. You'd be surprised how many villains come in here fussing over a shot. He didn't reply. Once again, he was back to being silent. I heard what you had to say last night. I stood up and adjusted the dosage in the drip chamber. He moved. It seemed like he wanted me to tell him more. I guess I'm kind of torn about it. I have friends who are heroes, and they're very nice people. But I understand your point, and I do think what you said was valid. Your friends are false heroes. The tone in his voice sounded absolute. Nothing was going to change his mind about that. I suppose you're right. As much as I did disagree with the hero killer, I didn't want to argue points with him. He was certainly passionate about his stance, and I worried that taking an opposing view would snap his fragile mental state. Under any circumstances, I had no plans to disclose anything about Hizashi with Stain. Hizashi was the living embodiment of everything the villain hated about heroes. The blonde hero thrived on being in the public eye, and he took the entertainment part of his job very seriously. I gave him a quick checkup. Stain didn't add any more to our conversation, and I didn't push him to say anything else. I opened the curtain to see the officer staring back at me with angry eyes. My stomach turned as I waved at him and unlocked the door. Sorry, I must have locked that on accident. Shifting my gaze to the villain, I smiled. He's been one of my easiest patients today. I failed to mention the fact that he was my only patient as well. The officer didn't look too amused at my comment. I quickly said goodbye and slinked out of the room. I made my way back to the nurse's station and sat at my desk. Although I already knew I didn't have any messages, I checked anyway. The same text from yesterday morning sat in my inbox. 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗏. A voice whispered into my ear. I jumped and flailed my arm out of reflex. Takahashi snickered at me, avoiding my hand. I whined that he almost gave me a heart attack. He ignored my comment completely. So how was the hero killer? Fine, I replied. It still felt like my heart was going to explode. Same as usual. I did some things and wrote stuff down. Well, that's certainly anticlimactic. Takahashi sat on my desk. Any clues as to how long he's going to be sticking around? Personally, he gives me the creeps. Says a lot considering he's on the other side of the building. Hey now, you're not the one who has to be in a room with him. I gave Takahashi a smile. And we all think you're crazy. Brave, but crazy. Takahashi returned my smile. I have to be a little crazy to put up with you. The man sitting on my desk gave me a playful punch on the arm. Takahashi began talking about anything and everything that came to his mind. From the cute guy he saw at the mall the other day to a weird dream he had and everything in between. Every time I reached out to look at my phone, knowing nothing had changed, Takahashi would bring up a new topic. I was onto him. He didn't want me looking at my phone. Taking the hint, I stopped checking for a text from Hizashi that I knew wasn't there and focused in on our conversation. I didn't get a message the next day, either. Unlike the day before, however, I made some progress towards getting Stain to open up just a little. We were now on a 2-word basis. So your quirk activates by consuming blood. Do you like how that stuff tastes? I glanced over to Stain, who was in his usual hunched forward sitting position. Not really, he replied. I looked back to the monitor, keeping track of his blood pressure and heart rate. Everything seems normal today. Does it run in the family? Quirk types can be genetic. It wasn't a very unusual question. I guess. He was staring ahead at the officer. I looked over to him as well. The officer refused to fall for my antics, as he put it, and insisted he'd stay. I studied the villain's tongue while he was preoccupied with the man across the room. It had many unique properties. The villain didn't seem like he wanted to talk to me anymore. I went over the standard questions for someone with a bruised rib cage. Can you breathe deeply? Does it hurt to breathe? The device holding him down stopped me from asking the other questions. I jotted down his short answers and packed up my things. I think that's enough for now. I'll see you again when it's time for your next checkup. Stain remained quiet. I said goodbye to the officer before leaving. The monotone sound of the keypad beeping meshed with the steady beeps of Stain's heart rate monitor. I took one last look at the villain as I stepped out of the room. Something was off. The ward was virtually empty. This block goes mostly unused, so staff is hardly ever assigned here. If not for the hero killer being placed in a room in 𝗵𝘃𝗲, I doubted anyone bothered turning on the lights. I kept my head down as I reread his files. This doesn't look right. The paper in front of me says 𝗲𝗏𝗏 detained him. However, I've seen a lot of villains caught by the number 2 hero come and go. Stain's wounds didn't quite match up. His burns were kept to a minimum, and for the most part, he was in excellent health. Something made me doubt that 𝗲𝗏𝗏 went easy on Stain. We've had villains come in for less severe crimes in a worse state. Although it didn't matter much, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It got to the point where I mentioned it to Takahashi. who also had spent a healthy amount of time with villains brought in by 𝗵𝗲𝗍. "I think you're overthinking it," Takahashi replied. I admitted I knew that I was. Even so, the mystery behind it was fascinating. Enough about 𝗧𝗵𝗲. How about that hero boy, Hizashi? I haven't heard from him in a couple of days now. Admittedly, I checked his radio station last night, and he was fine. I think he's just too busy to talk right now. Takahashi crossed his arms and looked at me. I told him that some space is good for us. The dark-haired man reluctantly agreed and stepped outside of the nurse's station. I watched the automatic door close behind him and pulled out my phone. Resting my head in my hands, I sifted through messages and pictures sent before intern week. Days went by, and everything was about the same as usual. I woke up early and treated my handful of patients, one of which was the infamous hero killer. Hizashi has been quiet. The only new development was that Takahashi stopped asking about him. I've insisted plenty of times throughout the week that I didn't want to bother Hizashi, especially since we were just friends, and I had no reason to ask that he talk to me every day. It seemed like it finally sunk in that I meant it. I was counting the days until intern week was over. I genuinely missed our afternoon and evening conversations. Plus, on top of that, I now had an interesting story to share with the hero. Finally, the day came. Intern week was over. Part of me felt awful about how excited I was. I kept my phone close to me, waiting for my inevitable text detailing everything Hizashi had done this week. But nothing showed up. Throughout the day, I found myself looking at my phone, assuming that maybe my signal was suddenly bad or that I turned off my alerts. Nothing. I put my phone away as I stepped into 𝗧𝗵𝗲's room. "Hello, good morning." I was greeted by his usual silence. Before coming here, I was briefed by the boss. He told me that today was the hero killer's last day at this hospital. I tried to fight it. A bruised rib cage doesn't heal in a few days. But it was no use. They now had a place in 𝗬𝗪𝙢𝙢𝗢 for him, and he was going to be sent away. I went down my usual list of things to do. Check 𝗧𝗵𝗲's temperature, record his vitals, make sure he takes his medications, and inquire about his breathing. The man who was posted to keep an eye on 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stepped out of the room. If I had to guess, he was probably going to get a hero to assist in collecting him. I sat up straight and pulled out my phone. No texts or calls. Expecting something, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked. I looked at him in shock. The hero killer has never started a conversation before. The guard wasn't in the room. I guess that was why. I must have earned an ounce of trust. "I suppose," I replied. Putting away my phone, I sat next to the hero killer. "So, I have to ask, did 𝗵𝗲𝗍 really detain you? Your wounds don't line up, and it's been bugging me." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 used his time to recollect the events of that night. He vaguely discussed meeting with the leader of the League of Villains, the discourse between them, meeting a group of heroes in training, his fight and loss, saving one of the kids, the one he described as being worthy, from a flying monster. His story stopped there, adding that I should know the rest. On the other side of the door, the keypad beeped. I saw the officer with a much taller man behind him. 𝗵𝗍𝗍. I smiled at the two, but I was upset inside. There was so much I wanted to discuss to 𝗧𝗵𝗲 about since he was in the mood to talk. The League of Villains was fascinating to me. He only vaguely talked about them. He mentioned that he had issues with the leader, but he might show promise in the future. That was a cliffhanger and I wanted to know more. Also, I was interested in finding out which UA students fought him off. I had to have seen them at the sports festival, so I was very interested in knowing. "Goodbye, Mr. Akaguro." I got up and stood out of the way as the hero and police officer took 𝗧𝗵𝗲 away. I followed them down the empty hallways for a bit, trailing from afar. Once we got to a more populated part of the hospital, I noticed some of the staff were staring. Some were looking at 𝗵𝗍𝗍, but most were gawking at 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I rolled my eyes. He isn't that scary. I looked over to my phone for what could have only been the 10th time in the past hour. Still, no texts. Now, without the hero killer keeping me company throughout the day, looking at my empty inbox felt awfully lonely.